The action begins in the central region of Liaoning province, where there are constant battles between two clans. Because of their character, they could not stop the eternal battle, carrying hundreds of casualties. Neither faction underestimated the province. It was the land of Musin that became the place where the two provinces fought a fierce battle, so to speak, battlefield. In honor of these events, a black bronze dragon pedestal was erected here on a rock to commemorate the fallen in this great battle. It was at this place that Dai Rikbu, one of the greatest warriors, met his longtime enemy. Opposite him was young Xiao Zhang. The leader of the other faction, they decided to resolve this conflict through their representatives fought in front of the people of this place. The two men stood opposite each other. One of them in a red robe was called Masterman. The opponent was called Chal. They greeted each other. People began to whisper the position of leader had been vacant for too long. No one had taken control. Today, Master Chol was determined to take over and rule these lands. Bearded Masterman smiled. He wasn't going to back down and give up his place as leader. The man was extremely serious. People on both sides started chanting. They raised their hands up and shouted in support of their leaders. Meanwhile, on a small hill, an old man sat with a bottle of some kind of alcohol in his hands and watched from the sidelines as he pondered whether these two were worth stopping. In the meantime, the men began to fight. No one was inferior to each other in strength, and blows of blades could be heard everywhere. There was nothing more exciting than watching the fight from the side. One of the silhouettes jumped up and flew straight towards the old man. The old alcoholic's name was Han. He rose to his feet and looked at the stranger landing right beside him. In front of him stood an old man with a beard and long gray hair. The old man did not even notice how he approached. Master Chal used the dragon sword. He was furious and was ready to destroy his opponent once and for all. Master Man swung his blade and with the same smile on his face, rushed into the attack. For him, the fight was like entertainment. The two masters fought to the end, with the sounds of blows being heard everywhere, as people held their breath, waiting for the results of the battle. A man stealthily crept up from the side, stood, and watched the battle of the Central District forces. Are they really like this? Before that, the man tried to get up with his last strength. He was holding onto the walls with his hands and breathing heavily. Suddenly, the hand he was holding onto the wall began to glow with a bluish glow. He kept thinking about his little girl. The man lowered his eyes, which were a bright shade of blue. The old drunkard watched him and could not believe his eyes. From this man emanated incredible peace and tranquility. The nameless master turned around and said in a calm voice that his heir would be coming soon. Not a second later, the old man pushed himself off the ground and like a bird began to soar through the air, leaving a trail of lightning behind him. After that, Hong instantly sobered up and began to think hard about what the heir to the heir's name meant. Suddenly, something started happening behind the old man. The tree next to him began to deform and turn into something. The old man was frozen with fear, but this man had only touched his hand and had already done such a thing. How powerful he was. After a fierce battle, the action shifts to the peaceful Nangrim Mountains in ancient Korea. Some guy was sitting on one of the wide branches and resting. He put his hands behind his head and enjoyed the beautiful nature. His name was Dan Sayu. The kid shifted his eyes when he heard some sound from outside. They'd come up to a girl about his age and tell him to go downstairs. Dan looked at her but didn't want to go down. The girl's name was Gong Mu Aye. She said Dan was the only one who could climb such a tall tree. But the guy wouldn't quit. He really thought she'd really like the view from here. It's incredibly cool. Not wanting to fool around any longer, the girl offered to go and have lunch together, and she had a small bowl of vegetables in her hands. Looking at her, Dan smiled. She was his sister, and the guy really liked her for her kindness. He pushed off the branch and flew downward. Merging with the air, Dan soared like a bird, literally unable to feel his weight. The sister was very scared of her brother because he might hurt himself if he jumps like that. But Dan didn't seem to worry about it. He was just having a good time. The two walked up to their village and looked down from the large cliff. Dan was old enough, but didn't seem to realize it yet. When they arrived in the village, they were immediately discussed. Why is that clan boy still here? How unscrupulous he is. Dan just twisted his head and wondered how strange these people were. Every time he came here, they started rambling. When they got closer, they were met by a man who immediately started snorting. Again, Gun is walking around with this clan kid. Doesn't she realize that this is dangerous? This man's name was Gongsu Deok. He grinned. The girl had already reached marriageable age, and it was only a matter of time before she found a husband. But against all that, Dan only smiled. Let this kid speak for himself. Until he was 8 years old, he couldn't even handle the daily chores by himself. This made the man very angry, and he immediately grabbed the insolent boy by the scruff of the neck and pulled him up to him. But suddenly a silhouette appeared behind him. Diok felt the presence of something ominous and stopped instantly. It was his mentor. Gongjok San, crept up unnoticed on his back, was an animal that he had caught while hunting. The man immediately lifted the insolent man by the scruff of his neck. In a gruff voice, he asked to step back. Diok blocked all the way. The man looked at him with a calm gaze. The girl saw that now the irreparable will happen, and said to immediately put him in his place. You cannot use your power. San threw the man away in one deft motion, and the unfortunate man flew to the side. Well, so be it. Breaking several chairs along the way, Diok came to a rage. This man will pay for everything incredibly humiliating. Some old woman opened her toothless mouth and shouted that San was a real bastard, her squeaky voice resounding throughout the village. It was the oldest in the village. She scolded the unhappy man in every possible way. San only looked at her and said he was glad to see her. The man handed her a small scroll and said there was important news the chapter should read. The elder opened the message and began to read, carefully squinting. San turned around and went about his business. Seeing the look on Dan's face tensed, and he shifted his gaze to her, he sensed something was wrong. The old woman looked at her ward and asked, "Didn't he read this news?" After all, he did. But the hunter was already gone, leaving the whole company alone. The village street was empty. After a long pause, the old woman began to rage and swore that if it didn't stop, she'd kick the fool out of the clan. Diok had already risen from his seat and shook himself off. Looking after his assailant, he would surely have his revenge. On the ground lay the body of a boar that he caught on the hunt. San, it was time to cook food. Everyone was hungry, need to help prepare dinner. Eventually, Sam began to cut up the boar carcass, and in passing, talking to his girlfriend, the girl came closer. Hearing that a relative wants to meet this man that Mu was chatting with this morning, the girl from where he knows him. Seeing the concern on his friend's face, Dan tensed up. Could she be seeing someone? The guy looked at her with his clear blue eyes. Santojo knew this guy in the village, to be honest. Everyone knew him. A man holding a big tisek in his hand. The conversation was about her liking this guy, but the girl denied it. She started to get very worried. Straightforward San immediately asked she that she wanted to marry him, but the unhappy girl tried to stop her relative. She blushed, and it couldn't be hidden. It was true. Mu had seen him. The place where he lives is far away from their village. Sitting alone, Dan himself was thinking about marriage, and his girlfriend was already of marriageable age and should have a family by now. Back in his shack, the boy began to tiptoe around looking for a bow to hunt in the room someone else was sleeping. He walked out of the house, trying not to wake his girlfriend, and headed away on his errands. Suddenly, someone called out to him. Dan turned around and looked at the man with a surprised look. Did he wake him up after all? The man wondered where he was going at such a late hour. It's already nighttime. Don't let him say it's because he's getting married. Looking at his friend, Dan said he was going to sell the leather he had collected. San said he'll give it to Mue when she gets married. Dan will always devote himself to the army. San looked thoughtfully in front of him and asked how long the kid was going to stay here. He was always alone. Dan looked at him with enlightened eyes and said that he could not leave the village until he was 20. He had promised that to his father. And besides, let San stop making stuff up and get ready for the army. He'll take care of the girl. Even so, San wasn't going to leave his little sister behind. He'd rather run away from the barracks than leave her alone. While the two men were talking, Moyaz expected she was awake and eavesdropped on their conversation, but didn't make a sound so as not to give herself away. They talked for a few minutes. Dan was surprised that Sanu was the same age as he was, although they looked different. With complete confidence in his voice, Dan said that they must make her happy, and he swore to himself that he would fulfill that duty. Lastly, San shouted for a friend to gather wild ginseng. If he found himself on his way, the roots would come in very handy. Waving goodbye, Dan ironically said not to cry for him, he would be back soon. When the boy entered the village, Diok was waiting for him, still awake at this late hour and wondering where he was going. Today, the man was ready to avenge this morning's humiliation and would make sure it didn't happen. Dan smiled as he looked at him sideways and smiled at the man they called trash, but still wanted the boy to think of him as a mentor. Suddenly, she came out of the house and said that a letter from the family had arrived, so you walked Dana away and let him go where he was going. After such harsh words, Dan tensed up. He was not loved in this village, and the lad reciprocated. Diok was furious and ordered him to stop immediately, but the boy didn't listen to him. The elder ordered him to be released in peace, but the man wouldn't let it go. saying he couldn't be released like that. But the elder thought otherwise. This boy is going to the next world anyway, so it's better not to touch him. It's better for you. Meanwhile, somewhere far away in the mountains, a convoy was advancing with horses and wagons. People were climbing up a cliff. On one of the horses sat a huge man wrapped in animal skins and gazing thoughtfully before him. Meanwhile, Dan wondered what he had thought would take 100 years, but he had found the plants much faster. He had 2 whole wild ginseng roots in his hands, where now he would bring them to the family quite successfully. The guy grasped his finder and lifted it up and shouted with joy, "Yes, he is a lucky man today." I wanted to go back quickly, but a fog suddenly appeared in the forest and blocked the way Dan was moving almost blindly. Suddenly the boy heard a rumble and saw a bright flash somewhere in the distance. Looking closely, he wondered. Someone had thought of lighting a fire somewhere high up in the mountains. Someone is here besides him? The boy looked closer. Dan came a little closer and saw a strange old man sitting by the fire, thinking about something without giving any sign of life. The man sat with his eyes closed. He frowned, meditating, concentrating all his energy. It's not like the man was lost or anything. The boy looked closer and crept even closer. The old man stared before him with the piercing gaze of some strange feeling consumed the boy when he was near the man offered to approach. Realizing that he had finally been discovered, Dan climbed out of the bushes and raised his hands up. He wanted to pretend he was lost, but it looked strange. Goosebumps ran down my back. Who knows what you can expect from this old man? The guy smiled and tried to be friendly. They started grilling shish kebab from mushrooms. The old man probably hadn't eaten for a long time. The man took the skewer and looked at the mushrooms, still not deciding to eat them. Maybe he was afraid. After watching him for a while, Dan realized that the man didn't look hungry. Maybe he was just walking in the woods and decided to rest. The man saw that the kid was eating very fast and advised him to chew well, otherwise the body would not absorb everything it needed. By the way, who is he? Hearing Dan's question, Dan, with a full mouth, introduced himself and said where he lived. The boy shifted his concerned gaze to the strange stranger. The man said that he knows this place surprisingly. This kid is from the Dan clan. It's been a long time since the man has certainly not met someone like this. A little embarrassed, Sayu scratched the back of his head and said that it happened because of certain circumstances. Seeing the new acquaintance's uneasiness, the old man squinted his eyes at this guy hiding fear behind a smile after all. After being revealed, Sayu frowned. This man that can read minds, bright eyes, frightened him. Deciding to change the topic of conversation, the boy asked where this old man was going. This place is high in the mountains. From here to the nearest village is far away. The man frowned and lowered his head and said he wanted to take someone's life. It sounded incredibly calm. Hearing such a monstrous truth, the boy was frightened and began to discourage the man need to live right so that it would not happen. Hearing that the old man didn't even deserve to be robbed of his life, Sayu wondered how that was even understood. The man said he would just wait for his end. This is where he leads the journey, and he hasn't eaten anything this good in a long time. After this strange conversation, Sayu fell silent. The guy didn't know what to say. This old man was somehow very strange. Laying down on the soft grass, Sayu pondered, "What's wrong with this old man? He's strange and says he's going to die soon." The old man was still sitting in the same position, leaning against the tree. When morning came, the mist had cleared and the fire was out. It was time to return, and the boy started from his seat. When he returned, Sayu was horrified. He had lost one of the ginseng roots. I could have bailed out several bags of rice for it. The boy pondered, and why he gave the root to this old man. Such people are annoying. He stood and looked up, thinking about what to do now. So that's how it's going to be. The second root shouldn't have gotten him one anyway. With these thoughts, Sayu moved forward to his village, throwing his hands behind his head. His mood improved. When the boy returned to the village, his old acquaintance Dayak was waiting for him there, and the man attacked the offender, wanting to beat him up. The poor kid didn't react right away and received a powerful fist blow right in the back of his head. The man pinned his enemy to the ground, not letting him lift a finger, but now he'll get even. By the way, the whole village had already gathered, along with the oldest old woman, who said in a squeaky voice that nobody would have touched the boy if he had just left. As luck would have it, Sayu couldn't understand why he was bothering anyone. He was just living his life and not touching anyone. Diok wanted to hit him, but suddenly he felt pain as the little man caught his finger with his teeth. And then he came up and elbowed him right in the jaw, and the poor man said goodbye to a few teeth. Surprisingly, Seiyu, with his frail body, suddenly gained incredible strength. He flew aside, throwing his enemy away. With the man pinned to the ground, the boy drew his bow and prepared to shoot. The tip was right next to the enemy's face. Everything has an end, and so does patience. Seiyu wasn't going to put up with such attacks anymore. The boy's face changed. He became fierce and wanted revenge. He was taken in a long time ago and constantly bullied. The village elder was silent. She didn't know what to say. The situation was worse than ever. The old woman looked at everything that was happening and could do nothing. Screaming to keep away from him, the offended boy launched an arrow. It whistled and flew straight at the old woman. Luckily, the woman was unhurt. The arrow flew past but hit the door with tremendous speed and knocked it off. The old woman looked at her wounded cheek and trembled with fear. She didn't know what to do. Everyone seemed to realize how bad the situation was now. Mad with rage, Seiyu could no longer hold his temper. He shouted that he would destroy anyone who came near him. The whole village, along with the head, stood there not knowing what to say. They were numb with fear and just waited. The boy wasn't going to take it anymore. Well, if they wanted Seiyu to leave the village, then he would do it with his men. After saying that, the boy immediately turned around and walked away. The elder wanted to say something else, but she wasn't listened to. Deok shouted that the messenger was coming soon. If the girl left them for the village, it threatened total destruction. Speaking of which, the man had already arrived and was standing on horseback, looking at the villagers with a stern gaze. Meanwhile, Mui was right in her house doing chores as she suddenly heard a familiar scream. Hearing a familiar voice, the girl smiled as it was time to eat. Seiyu had already returned, and the girl had no idea what had happened. He shouted that he had to get ready and started to crawl into the house. His friend didn't understand anything at all. Opening the door, Seiyu burst into the house with a look of sheer terror and rage on his face. "We need to take only the essentials on the bed were a few necessities wrapped in a bundle." Mui came into the room. She said she was still working and didn't have time, but the guy yelled that it was urgent. "They have ginseng root, so they'll last a while, but we have to pack immediately." Saying that her brother had gone into the mountains to chop wood, Mu wondered what was going on and why her friend was so excited. The boy Lick glanced at her with a wary look. Of all things, this was the last thing she wanted to talk about. The girl still didn't understand anything and looked at her friend with a shriek, but she didn't object. Grabbing her friend's hand, the guy moved forward. Mu dropped the grocery basket from her hands and ran forward. They ran, and Seiyu looked back every now and then to see if anyone was still running after them. The warlord had already arrived at the village and was talking to the oldest woman about something. It was the same man with a large scar all over his face, staring at the villagers with a piercing look full of hatred. Running away, Seiyu thought that he just couldn't give them his friend, or else who knows what they would do to her. The man frowned and looked to the side and saw two fugitives trying to escape into the woods. Turning to his two subordinates, he barked an order to stop the woman. Two men nodded their heads. "As for this kid, I don't care if they can take his life if they want to. But with a girl, let them be careful." The elder and Deok looked at each other in horror. They realized that the situation was worse than ever, but there was nothing they could do. Several warriors immediately soared into the air like birds and ran after the two people trying to escape. The warlord himself realized that this strange kid would make a very good hunter if caught alive. Meanwhile, Seiyu was trying to hide in the thick of the forest while pulling his friend along with him. He heard some kind of crackling behind him. Two mercenaries were already approaching them from behind, and they were flying towards them like birds with their blades out. Not wanting to give up himself and give up his friend, Seiyu took out his bow and drew an arrow he would have to fight back. The arrows, whistling, flew straight at the offenders. The guy jumped back and kept running. One of the men spun like a whirlwind and began to beat back the arrows with his daggers. After this, the boy couldn't believe his eyes how it was to understand how this man got such a reaction. The man caught up with the unfortunate lad in a split second and brought him to the ground with one swipe of his hand. Seeing such a horrifying picture, Mu cried out in fright, but there was nothing she could do. Just then, another mercenary grabbed her head and covered her mouth with his hand so the girl couldn't call for help. The man squinted and smiled, saying that he would destroy this kid instantly, so let him not even try. Just in time, the Sandman appeared, and with a single blow of his powerful fist, threw the mercenary aside. His brother was just gathering firewood here. The other mercenary holding the girl covered in goosebumps from the horror of their plan being thwarted. The warrior thrust his sword forward and slammed it into the ground. The man survived. The exhausted Seiyu lay on the ground, and breathing heavily, he didn't expect anyone to come to his aid now. San looked at his friend and asked who these guys were. There was obvious consternation and worry on the man's face. He managed to unleash his friends, so these two from Yuan arrived. Then it all makes sense. Sayu explained that they came to take Mue and offer her as a princess. That's why they are chasing them. First, you have to get high into the city before the peak, and then these two can't track them. The mercenaries began to glance around. One of them took up his dagger and prepared to attack. He wasn't about to let go of his prey so easily. Seeing that the situation was critical, San shouted for them to finally come over. He would not give up his relatives to anyone, even at the cost of his life. He threw the bandage of firewood out of his hands and armed himself with a huge axe and moved forward. The man swung around and prepared to strike. His mind was gripped by fury. He would destroy anyone who dared attack his sister. Even the experienced mercenary was surprised by such a sturdy kid, though he was still too young. On the other side of the man, there wasn't much time, so now both of these guys are going to be sent to the other side of the world. The man chopped the wood with one blow. Suddenly, a sand man appeared armed with an axe. But that didn't bother him. He struck one after another. The mercenary was faster. He dodged with his blades. At the last moment, San saw a huge blade approaching him, about to separate his head from his body. But now, the battle diminished. Sayu Boy jumped up and aimed his arrow needed to help his comrade. Releasing the bowstring, Sayu launched 2 arrows directly at his enemy. The weapon sliced through the air with a whistling sound. The mercenary looked up. This kid is so brazen as to attack him head-on. But it's still no good. An experienced soldier deflected 2 arrows at once with a single blow. Catching the moment, San swung his huge fist and prepared to strike his opponent. There was a monstrous rumble. The man's heavy fist slammed right into the body of the enemy and threw him deep into the forest. The mercenary had already realized that he could not cope on his own. He was seized by the rage of these little ones that were so insolent. But the man didn't have time to realize anything, as another arrow began to approach his head. In time to dodge, the man felt the approaching danger with his whole body. The arrow stuck a few centimeters from his face. But he missed another blow. The second arrow stabbed him in the leg, nailing him to a tree. The second mercenary laughed, and these two know how to surprise. He still held the girl in his arms, not going to retreat. Suddenly, another male ambassador from Yuan already tracked down. The two of them began to approach them. Sayu immediately recognized this ambassador and informed his friend. San only looked at him furiously, but couldn't tell before. The ambassador looked down at them. He couldn't believe that 2 experienced fighters couldn't handle a couple of ordinary kids. One of the mercenaries, still holding a blade near the unfortunate girl's throat, apologized. Yes, he is guilty, but there is nothing he can do. The man looked at them with a piercing stare and growled something under his breath. The frightened mercenaries bowed. They understood and waited to be punished at home. They would have a very funny conversation waiting for them. The incompetence of their fighters was astounding, but nevertheless, Sayu was a very hurt guy, already preparing to fight back. Still, the seasoned warrior was surprised that these two could last so long against 2 mercenaries. The man kicked his foot on the ground so hard that the wind picked up around him and began to ripple the grass. Something terrible was about to happen. The 2 guys had already prepared themselves for a very hard fight with this monster, and he was not going to spare them as usual. The frightened Sayu didn't realize what kind of energy this guy was. The first time he had encountered something like this, he could barely stand on his feet. And opposite San was fully prepared and raring to fight. He was like a rabid bear. If this man wants his sister, let him go through them. However, the ambassador came only a few steps closer and put his hand to his opponent's chest. Everything went silent for a second. Silence hung. Sayu froze in place and stared wide-eyed in front of him and waited. The mercenaries were smiling and triumphant. Now their leader would show how strong he was and talk about it. The chieftain's arm, leaning against the enemy's body, began to overflow with energy, and the man felt incredible pain. Without even moving, the experienced fighter threw the enemy back a few meters, and the man flew like a sack of potatoes. Seeing such a monstrous sight, Sayu only cried out in surprise, but there was nothing he could do as he realized he was powerless in this situation. Another mercenary male immediately appeared next to the boy, already preparing to attack and smiling. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Sayu grouped himself and drew his arrow to stop the monster, at least somehow. The man saw the sharp tip approaching him, and time seemed to slow down for him, as if he were watching from the sidelines. Ducking down, he moved out of the line of attack, and the arrow cut through his cloak with a whistle, separating a piece of cloth. It only took one blow to have the unfortunate teenager already lying on the earth, almost out of breath, but he was still alive, thankfully. The ambassador looked at him and bared his teeth. He would still take this woman to Yuan, and these two would stay here forever. The unfortunate kid was lying on the ground and writhing, but he couldn't do anything. His whole body was paralyzed by the incredible energy. Looking at him again, the mercenary decided to give them a chance who would go to the other world first. Let them think. San watched it from the sidelines and waited for the tragic denouement. He had goosebumps running down his spine at the realization of what was about to happen. The man shrieked with rage and ordered him to stop, but I doubt anyone would have listened to the poor man. Unable to tolerate such a thing any longer, San ripped out the root of one of the trees in one motion and was about to launch it at the enemy. They stood staring at each other for a few seconds. The tension gradually built up to a breaking point. In the end, the rage-stricken San launched a huge tree trunk directly at the enemy to knock him off his feet. The old mercenary smiled. He was touched by such a desire to save his comrade, but not this time. The man clenched his fist and began to approach. He would destroy these two with one blow. There was a cracking sound. The impact was so strong that the massive tree trunk shattered into several pieces. The mercenary smiled and laughed, but this man really knows how to make a man angry. The tree flew apart and went approaching Sanu with great speed. The man turned into a real predator. His eyes glowed like a monster, and he ran with all his legs. One big blow, and the unfortunate man flew aside from the throne, like a doll, unable to do anything. The mercenary was already celebrating his victory as Sayu appeared behind him. The boy decided not to sit idly by, and at least help his comrade. He flew like a kite and put his foot forward, preparing to strike. The boy already realized that he had nothing to lose. He shouted for the enemy to stop, but no one listened to the poor guy's face was really monstrous horror. Seeing his friend being beaten up, Sayu bravely rushed forward to somehow save him, but it was unlikely to do anything. The mercenary swung a huge fist. He already saw the enemy approaching him and was ready to stop the boy. There was a loud bang and Sayu flew backwards like a puppet. The impact was incredibly strong. The unfortunate girl, who had been in captivity all this time, only tried to watch helplessly. She could do nothing. The mercenary smirked. He liked it even more when the victim tries to break free. Suddenly, he was grabbed by his leg by San. The man was somehow still alive and was trying his best to save his sister. He pounced on the enemy like a buffalo and tried to beat him up, even though his strength was failing him. Adrenaline had completely taken over his body, and the man swung his fist and tried to hit the offender. However, the mercenary was much faster and more experienced. He dodged at the last moment and bounced to the side. Then the man lifted San's body in the air with one hand and began to hold it like a rag doll. The ambassador held the man's body above the abyss and was about to lower him into the abyss, taking his life. What he liked best was mentally, physically humiliating people like that, which he really enjoyed. The mercenary unclenched his fingers, and San's lifeless body flew straight down into the abyss. The unfortunate Muo, seeing his brother just thrown into the abyss, only screamed, but she couldn't even break free. The mercenary held tightly. Sayu ran to the edge of the cliff, only to fall to his knees, and watched his friend being swallowed by the abyss. Another mercenary was already approaching him from behind. No need to retreat. Soon the boy would catch up with him. Unable to take this abuse any longer, the boy jumped up and tried to knock his opponent down with one powerful blow. The boy became incredibly fast, and the mercenary, who was not expecting anything like this, flew aside. The teenager continued to beat the man time after time. Intensifying his blows, he became like a beast. The other two men just stood back and watched in horror at what was happening, with a chill running down their backs. In an attempt to stop this monster somehow, one of the mercenaries grabbed the boy's thin arm and tried to pull him away. The ambassador grabbed the kid's brush and said he could go to the other world without regret, which he would. Seeing her unfortunate friend thrown right into the wall, Mu cried out in grief. She wanted to help him in some way, but it was useless. Sayu lay on the ground and barely breathing. It seemed the boy had already given his life, but as if that didn't seem like enough. Seeing the remnants of life in the boy's body, the man grasped his long sickle and wanted to destroy the annoying teenager for good. Well, he'll give it his best, the seasoned warrior, armed with a long sickle on a chain swung. The unhappy boy felt that he was about to go to the other world, but he could not do anything. He kept thinking about his comrades. Mie's face was in front of his eyes. The girl was yelling something, but his hearing couldn't pick up any sounds. The furious mercenary looked at him like a beast. Why did they come after this girl? What was the reason at all? And now the unfortunate fellow was chained to some tree and crucified as if on a cross. The blood wolf monsters appeared from somewhere, snapping their fangs and already smelling their prey. Where did you come from? An old man already familiar to us stood on the grass and watched now. This kid looks extremely pathetic. Frowning, the old master asked the boy if he wanted to live. This voice sounded incredibly clear. The wolves were getting closer and closer. They could smell the blood and wanted to get their prey. Hunger drove these monsters to do terrible things. Seeing the old man destroy one of the monsters with a flick of his finger, Sayu was frozen with fear but could do nothing. There were wolves around, but the man stood his ground as if he felt no danger. His eyes began to glow like a real demon's blue light spilled from his face, further and further away. A pack of wolves rushed at a defenseless-looking man in an attempt to eat him alive. With a single movement of his hand, the old master touched the wolf, and the beast's body began to deform, as if turning into a scrap of cloth. The same fate befell the other wolves. From their bodies, there was nothing left of the old man standing whole and unharmed. He continued to stare at the helpless boy, as if expecting something else. There was silence. The exhausted boy hung on the chains and waited. He wanted to live. He was told it would be worse than hell. The old man raised his head and said that his dear friend was already in the other world, and his sister had been taken by the barbarians. Seeing that the boy continued to laugh, the old man snapped his fingers and a bundle of lightning burst from his hands. Immediately the chains broke, and the still equally exhausted Sayu threw himself down. The boy fell without feeling his weight. The old man continued to stand. For all this time, he did not move from his seat and watched the strange lad. After flying a few more meters, Sayu fell into the strange old man's arms. His case was incredibly easy. In the end, the victim was already lying on the ground with not a single bone intact, and his internal organs were damaged. In the old man's hands was a wild ginseng root that the boy had given him the other day out of pity, so it actually saved him. The old man squeezed his hand with a root, and it began to glow with a bright blue glow that flooded the entire space. The old man started talking and listing how many bones and muscles there are in the human body. His hands continued to burn with a blue glow. The master said that the boy would now be able to control them all without exception. As soon as the man touched Sayu's body, the unfortunate guy felt the energy of the clothes start to fly off. The old man sat down in the lotus posture and began to reason. He observed the result of his actions and just waited. While the unfortunate boy was writhing in unbearable agony, the old man continued to tell him about the structure of the human body. The master said that when Sayu learns all this, he will be able to learn all martial arts without exception. It will be like training for him. Meanwhile, an invisible spirit was approaching Mount Muyang. It was an old man with a long gray beard and very white skin like chalk. Soon the ghost approached the cave. It led somewhere deep into the mountain, and there was only impenetrable darkness. The old man landed on the ground with an incredibly frightening spirit emanating from him. He asked to come to him, but was too late himself. The immortal swordsman sat in front of him and said that everything was fine. Could it be that this time he was invited for the good of the new country? The ruler must change to that is the will of heaven. A man in a robe sat in the lotus posture and pondered. In front of them sat another old man with a long beard. It was a wise man. He said he understood both of them and would explain why he had invited them. An old man and a young man came here to meet the 7 earthly deities. They said they would reveal the martial arts to them. The combination of combat and magic is the only means to destroy earth deities. Nothing else will work. Meanwhile, the old man tried to revive the boy by giving him his power. It took many days to create this martial art, but eventually another skill was revealed. The old man reached out to the lifeless body of the man, who sat leaning back and barely breathing. The blow was so strong that the man instantly lost consciousness. His clothes were torn. This strike allowed for the complete destruction of the human cardiovascular system. Chol Sanka. His power is incredibly powerful and miraculous. No man on earth could match him in speed or strength, no matter how much the boundless wall tried. With a single blow, he could defeat any opponent, whether it was a deity or an ordinary person. The wise man said that in recent days, many innocent people have lost their lives. Because of the unknown old man, the situation is escalating. Instead of creating a new country, the Earth's path to immortality might be cut short before it even begins. The elder frowned. Supreme Spirit Khan is back from Hell's Supreme Artillery General. Eventually, Sayu still managed to get to his feet. The guy had already regained consciousness and was trying to figure out where he was. There are heaven weapon technique. The old man's eyes lit up with rage. He looked like a demon. This technique came from one ancient martial art. The old man was heading straight towards the boy at a tremendous speed. Sayu looked at him with a serious and calm gaze. This was training. The old man was not going to hold back. Their hands collided with each other, and there was an incredible rumble as bits of earth began to rise into the air. The boy's hands were gloves made of hard steel as weights, and he moved his hands with incredible speed. As soon as the old man touched only one finger to the boy's elbow, the arm began to deform and twist on its own. Putting out 2 fingers, the old man prepared to deliver another blow. Must remember, with his body, not his head. At the last moment, Sayu left the line of attack and pushed the old man's hand away, though it cost him a lot of effort. The boy's own arm began to twist. Cramps covered his entire body, but he held on with his last strength. His arms twisted in different directions, but Sayu tried to regain control of his body despite the monstrous pain. At the last moment, the old man hit him with only 2 fingers, but it was enough to make the boy fly aside like a doll. Landing on his feet, Sayu tried to come to his senses. The boys barely held on, but still on his feet. It was obvious that he was tired. The old man said that it does not mean that the fight is over. The enemy is still awake. Despite all this hellish pain, Sayu stoically held on, even when he realized that his body was completely disobeying. The old man looked at him and smiled. Even though this guy is still a beginner, he understands the basics pretty well. It's already something. Lightning flashed, and the old man instantly vanished from his place, leaving behind only broken ground. Sayu's eyes widened in surprise as his teacher disappeared into thin air. The old man appeared suddenly out of nowhere and hit the boy with a powerful lunge right in the chest. The poor man immediately bent in half. Looking at him with burning eyes, the old man explained, "These lightning bolts were the key to learning the 10 striking point technique." The boy felt such a powerful blow that he could not stand on his feet and flew like a rag doll from the powerful blow of the old man. The poor guy felt dozens of electric shocks run all over his body, but he couldn't do anything. Sayu gathered all the energy in him and tried to stay on his feet. His body was not obeying. The old man frowned. Originally, he was supposed to awaken the energy in the boy's body slowly, but there is no time for that. Half a year passed, and the young master was already sitting on Mount Myeongyasan, which was a cultivation site. He and the old man stood in front of a whole army of people, one of them shouting for the 2 of them to stop the rampage here. Seeing the obstacle in his way, the old man was a little angry as to how dare these people stand in front of him. The guards said that the venerable master had instructed them not to let anyone onto this land. After the order to destroy the invaders, several people turned into shadows and jumped up. They flew like birds of prey straight at these 2 who looked defenseless. Seeing the attackers coming towards them, Sayu charged his hands with energy and prepared to fight back just to test his skill. He could become a true weapon of the heavens if he fully mastered this technique. A wide smile appeared on the boy's face. He was like a true beast, scattering everything around him. His body overflowed with energy, so much that it lifted up rocks. People couldn't stay on their feet, soared into the air and tried to do something, but it was useless. One of the main ones gritted his teeth. He didn't realize what was happening and couldn't do anything. It was just a monstrous power. Eventually, the man decided to break into the fight, swinging a stick. He pounced on the 2 invaders in an attempt to do something. At the last moment, the student bounced to the side and moved out of the line of attack. The stick hit the ground, picking up scraps along with rocks. The monk saw something fly by his face at great speed and ducked, but goosebumps ran down his back. The man twirled his staff in his hands and tried to take aim at his opponent, but it was all to no avail. He unleashed up his lightning attack to at least hit the annoying kid at all. It was unsuccessful. As soon as the boy touched the staff with his hand, the wood immediately began to warp and twist as if it were cloth. The man bounced to the side and swung his leg to hit his opponent, but it was unlikely he would succeed. It only took a single touch for the experienced monk to fly somewhere deep into the wide gorge with a scream. He still couldn't figure out who this man was, who had disarmed him in one move. The last thing the man saw in front of him was clear blue eyes and only the silhouette of a man. The boy's light hand grasped the schmear that used to be the monk's foot. He and his teacher stood on a small rock and watched his enemies from above and had to vent their anger. The monk was sitting somewhere below, and looking at the bodies of his defeated comrades, he was cursing everything in the world. Looking at him, the old man asked if the monk would forgive his disciple for what he had done to his leg. The old man said that they had already lost a lot of time, so they should go to the hermits. Young Sayu obediently agreed with the master and followed the boy, listening to his teacher without question. Soon, they came to some cave. There was no one here, just bare walls and a damp smell, perfect for training. Suddenly, everything began to shake, the massive wall began to move, and rocks crumbled from above. The old man only hummed, Hermits tried to close their apprentice, tensed up, and looked around all around with a fierce gaze. A slight movement from a large ledge, and rushed somewhere down, literally without feeling the ground in front of me. The two travelers stopped at a strange place. In front of them was some kind of altar. There in the distance could be seen whose silhouette it was. It was the elder great sage, who took a closer look and saw that this kid was well built after all. Could it be the disciple of an evil spirit? The old master was the first to speak. He said that he knew that this place was called the Hermit's Cave and was also great for training. Quickly realizing what he was talking about, the hermit frowned. Allowing the apprentice to train here because of this old man's vanity could get hurt. The evil spirit raised his head and smiled, thanking him for worrying about him, but not too many words for someone who would soon part with his life. Tearing off his rags, the old man ordered his apprentice to concentrate and get ready. The man's body was all scarred. He walked a few steps forward and said that from now on, everything that happens here will be a great experience for the student. The worried boy himself realized that this was his teacher's last battle, but he only had to watch and observe. Rising from his seat, the hermit took up his staff. The fate that had brought them together a long time ago, the man prepared for battle. Everything around suddenly began to shake. Walls were collapsing. Massive rocks were flying somewhere down into the gorge. The hermit approached the old man with great speed, putting his blade forward. Well, the man did not move. The cloaked hermit swung his arm as if it were a blade and struck a swift blow, the air itself beginning to crumble under such power. It was an iron finger technique the hermit used to deliver dozens, if not hundreds of blows in a second. The old master himself stood like a rock and didn't move for a second as many blows rained down on his body. The man swung his arm and struck the ground with such force that the cave itself seemed to collapse. It was incredible power. Even a hermit who had lived here for decades was surprised at such power. Where did it come from? The old man smirked. They would have to give it their best shot if they didn't want to part with their lives right here and now. When the old man was teaching his student, he told about the ancient martial art of salsan. For the local hermits, it was considered an instrument of taking life. Turning to the boy, the old man looked at him with a piercing gaze. In these lands, martial arts are considered a sign of strength. A long time ago, an old man was on the verge of life. He clung to his chest and tried to stand on his feet. Many years ago, he was attacked by these hermits, who took him by surprise. Naturally, the old man couldn't handle such power. All these hermits thought the old man was an evil spirit. They said it was not too late. If they shared the same views, they would let him choose the name of the new country. But the old man didn't care about any of that. He would never forget what these people had done to him. The man was furious. Once upon a time, these people deceived him and distracted only the life of the dearest person, his daughter. The little girl disappeared with her nanny and was never seen again. It was then that the old master vowed to one day destroy them all. No matter what it cost him, the man covered himself. The eyes of one of the hermits were covered with a white veil, and yet this man had chosen the path of destruction. So and so could be. The old man, as if transformed into a demon, began to concentrate an incredible amount of energy, turning everything around him into ruins. Then disappearing almost forever, he began searching for his daughter all over the continent to no avail. All his life, the old man has been trying to find his daughter, whom he lost a long time ago. He can't even remember the girl's face. And now he fought the hermit at full power, destroying everything in his path in the name of getting revenge. The old man, looking more like a ghost than a man, came down from above, preparing his one powerful blow. It was the thunder sword. His face was already completely covered in fog. He was white as chalk, concentrating all his power. Folding his arms in front of him, the old man prepared to attack. Everything around him began to collapse. This was the final battle. The Grand Master stood with his arms spread out and concentrated all the energy he had. A man should put all the power into this strike. There was a rumbling sound. The old master was greatly exhausted, and lying on the ground, he said that if an apprentice ever found his daughter, let him keep her if all was well. Seeing the sadness on his student's face, the old man faintly smiled, that he had told him never to lose his smiles. Through his tears, the boy tried to smile, but it turned out quite badly. He realized that he had lost his master. And now Sayu sat, leaning on the altar. Completely alone, he had lost his last loved one. All his friends are in the other world, and his girlfriend was taken away by the Vandals. The boy pondered if the master had not been there, then he would also be who knows where now. If that old man had not come to his aid in that hell, Sayu would have stayed there forever and would never have learned this wisdom. More. Then the old master asked him if he wanted to live, even if he had to suffer. Sayu turned back. It's been many days since the master pulled him out of there, but he looks the same. The boy sat near the altar on which the master. Now his breathless body made no sound, but he looked like he was still alive. The old man had his eyes closed as if he were meditating. The boy bowed to the master one last time, greeted him, and saw him off on his last journey, promising to be faithful to his teachings. Eventually, the young master got up and looked around. The cave was empty. Only he was alone. Suddenly, a voice was heard in Sayu's head as if the master was seeing him off for the last time. The guy looked around and turned around back. On the altar still lay the lifeless old man. For the last time, the boy looked at him, as if expecting him to still be alive. The silhouette from the place where the kid was hanging on the chains and the master came to his rescue was still in my mind. Then he vowed to survive. Even if it got worse than it is, now he wanted to live, and he remembered that moment for the rest of his life. The master's face then looked very lively. Even in such a situation, the young apprentice kept smiling. Funny. Remembering the master's words about finding his own way, the boy smiled. Perhaps he would. The events moved to a temple high in the mountains, a huge structure hidden behind endless fog and mountain ranges. A few elders were sitting and looking at each other from the outside. It looked like they were statues of some sort. The other residents of the temple fled in terror, grabbing weapons in their hands. The evil spirit has awakened, and something must be done about it. The leader pointed to the rock and said that the others should remember this place where the elders sealed the evil spirit at the cost of their lives. The man roared. They must prevent the resurrection of the evil spirit even at the cost of their lives. Several fighters put their sticks forward and prepared to take the fight. They were ready to fight to the last man. Suddenly, the earth began to shake. People fell one by one in the mountains. A real earthquake began. After a powerful explosion, one of the monks raised his head and began to swivel his eyes in different directions. What had happened? The trap that had been dormant for many hundreds of years began to move. The man sat in his seat. I didn't understand what was happening. Sayu came out of the cave. The boy was tangled in some rags that had once been clothing and squinted against the sun. After a few steps, the guy stopped and looked around. Everything was new and completely unfamiliar to him. One of the monks froze in his seat and watched the strange boy who followed the evil spirit and entered the hermit cave. Almost all the monks were lying breathless bodies, the main one holding onto his wounded leg and not knowing what to do. It was him that he saw then silhouetted the boy next to the evil spirit on that fateful day. The evil spirit disciple was a young lad with blue eyes, just like this old man's. It was impossible to confuse him. Looking around, Sayu didn't realize if this was the temple. He only saw the cave he and his teacher had entered. Looking at all this, the old monk opened his eyes in horror. He saw the old man approaching them. It was the abbot of his temple. An old man in a red robe approached and greeted the Lord, asking if he wished a battle. The boy smiled and calmly replied that it was his master's way, but he does not wish to antagonize anyone. The old man hesitated for a moment and grinned in surprise. Such an answer was quite strange for a disciple of an evil spirit. But the other servant refused to accept it. Does the monk believe in the words of this devil of hell? The old monk suggested listening after all. The fighter was not going to listen to anyone. His eyes lit up like a demon's. He jumped up from his seat. His goal to destroy the evil spirit boy stood his ground and watched the angry man approach him. Wondering if he could last a couple seconds, the apprentice stood his ground and waited to be attacked. The kid looked up and saw a statue of a hermit holding a large sword, probably sealing the evil spirit there. But it didn't matter anymore. Sayu calmly looked at those statues in front of him and felt nothing. Applying the heavenly weapon technique, the guy walked closer and only touched the statue. A huge lightning bolt pierced the entire rock. The hand began to vibrate, and an incredible power was concentrated in it. In a second, the entire huge rock rose upwards just from a touch. Huge waves rose into the air. Turning to the other monks who had been watching him the whole time, the boy said he didn't care. Let them do what they wanted. The entire assembly, along with the one-legged monk and the abbot of the temple, froze in place. When he heard that he was going to be released, the boy folded his arms across his chest. Thanking for the generous generosity the master bowed to feud with this man makes no sense. Taking his head, Sayu couldn't believe his eyes. It had been 10 years since the master had been gone. Could it be that long that he had been sitting here? He would have to hurry. Sayu moved forward with a quick step. The rest of the monks just stood in their seats. The one-legged monk said that the boy's feet got in the way of the young master, and what happened to him were the consequences of a fair fight. The abbot of the temple looked at the young boy and asked where he was going after leaving the cave. Standing on the edge of the cliff, Seiyu said he would fulfill his master's destiny and go to the mainland. The old man smirked and laughed. On the mainland would soon be noisy. At this rate, the abbot understood how this would end. The boy only turned around on him and smiled slightly. He wasn't going to be with anyone the doctor was giving. In a second, the guy separated from the ground and flew somewhere in the abyss. Surprisingly, nothing evil came from him. Maybe he had surpassed his master. Seiyu flew through the air like a bird and didn't care that there were stone shards below. The first thing the guy decided to do was to take a shower. He dove out of the water and took a deep breath. It had been a long time since he had taken a bath. Seiyu laid down on the water. It was incredibly cold, but still pleasant. When the boy took his few belongings in his hands, he saw that there was nothing left of his clothes. If he had known, he would have taken at least a change of clothes. In his hands, he suddenly found himself holding a butterfly of some kind. It was made of some precious metal or stone. Thinking about her master's instruction, Seiyu smiled at the old man's daughter. Must have grown up long ago, after so many years had passed. After finishing his thoughts, the student looked around for some clothes. At least some clothes. But he couldn't go into town like that. Hearing the smell of food, the boy immediately bounced off the ground, and within a few steps, he found himself in a meadow. In the distance, the boy saw a rack of clothes, and it was just in time to steal them. Suddenly, a little girl ran out of the house next door and ran straight to the coat rack to collect clothes. The child was mumbling to himself and picking up clothes from the rack without noticing anyone around him. Suddenly, there was a strange wind. The child looked around and squinted a little fearfully. Seiyu appeared completely unexpectedly. The guy immediately changed his clothes and pulled on his pants along with his shirt. Everything fit just perfectly as if it was sewn on him, and the guy was happy and examined his new clothes. In order not to leave the child empty-handed, the boy threw her some strange pebble. The girl caught the offering and yet understood nothing. It was pearl bright blue in color and glistened in the sun. Look, she was a very beautiful girl, could not take her eyes away. But suddenly, a realization came to her. This strange man just took and stole clothes. Who he even was. Fleeing the scene in a flash, Seiyu was already standing on the big branch and surveying the surroundings. That well, the clothes he has after all. His hair was also dry, and the guy immediately tied it into a long ponytail. Now he could go to town. Smiling, he looked around now. Seiyu was ready to go to the city with only a short walk left. Meanwhile, to the south, a whole caravan of several dozen horses was already advancing in one gorge. They were led by the head of the Jian sect, a man named Sa Do-yuk, who looked around for possible opponents. Something about this place struck him as strange. The gorge looked ominous, and the man kept getting ready. Next to him walked an old man. He sighed heavily and said that there was nothing to be afraid of here, so you can relax. He was an ordinary and noble old man who traveled the world, and he said that no one would even dare to come close to the sect. Master Sa said that his sect has no desire to stay here in a small place. The current top of the place is an ironclad union, and he's going to be part of it. To accomplish that, they've been ruling this place for a long time. Yes, and besides, the Moyoung family started moving for some reason. The Iron Union created the Saha League, one of those powerful sects, and now there was a new ruler. The men were sure that soon it would all be over, and they would be the dominant link. After all, they are rich. One of the chests contained many gold bars that served as currency in this country at that time. The old man realized it would be difficult, so he decided to lend them military aid. Before he could say anything, an old man flew into his chest, and at first, he didn't even realize what had happened. Following this, he instantly got off his horse and fell to the ground. Everyone stirred. Everything happened with incredible speed. As expected here in the mountains, they were ambushed by several mercenaries rushed straight at the men. The old man had already lost his life and was lying on the ground, his eyes instantly blurred. The man leading the caravan didn't realize what was happening, but he was finished. Two people in big, wide-brimmed hats came closer. Sadoyuk turned out to have deceived everyone and wanted to embezzle the country treasures. The man in the wide hat smiled. It seems that these worthless people dream too much. Beside him stood a girl in the same hat. It was his sister. She turned to the side and looked somewhere in the distance. Up there, she saw some strange man and froze in place, maybe to catch him, but no. Brother said that if this man is here, the Iron Mask is probably around here too. The two silhouettes turned around and headed off into the distance, leaving behind a multitude of defeated bodies. The events shifted to a local town called Benshi. There were many people the town lived in their lives. A lot of people gathered at the Northern Tractor as waiters walked around and served customers. At one of the tables sat a fat man with dark skin and was drinking alcohol in large gulps. As expected of their boss, the man drank it all down to the bottom of the bottle, causing the audience to burst into raucous laughter. His name was Na Ha Chu. The leader of the 100 Skill Squad. The man laughed and offered everyone a drink. Another skinny man with a long mustache sat next to him, and he asked what they were going to do later. The fat man laughed. Of course, thanks to that raven, they were able to steal the gold, and now they can have fun. At one table hidden away sat a man, apparently the innkeeper. He could not say anything. All that was left was to hide behind the counter and watch them turn into ruins. The man looked out from behind the bar and couldn't understand where these bandits had come from and what they were doing here. Suddenly, a strange man dressed in some rags came in, and everyone immediately turned their gazes to him. The man had a bandage on his head, completely covering his eyes. Probably he was blind. It was an iron mask. Stranger walked up to the bar, probably wanted to order something. Everyone immediately kept looking at him. A man named Raven immediately jumped up to the stranger and said that the 1,000 Skills Squad had booked this in, so one must leave. In general, not wanting to listen to anything, do not get acquainted. Barked that he at least poured water. Man seems to be getting angry. The gang member was even frightened and retreated somewhere in the distance. Why yell like that? The innkeeper immediately ran out to the guest. What's more, the door swung open, and the very same two brother and sister appeared there. My sister's name was Moyen Jin, and my brother's name was Moyen Kwang Seong. The hotel seemed small and dirty right away. Iron Mask looked at them and squinted at the two heroes. As expected, their family decided to intervene. The brother and sister greeted the stranger. They had probably heard about him. When they heard about the Ryok village, everyone immediately got scared and threw their drinks out of their hands. Iron Mask said that his family avoids conflict as best they can, so isn't it better to get out of here? His sister looked at him and said their family was asking for the same thing, so maybe he would agree. The man leaned over and leaned on the table. The situation between them was heating up. He began to change, literally, in front of his eyes. His clothes fluttered in the wind. The man emanated an incredible energy to take everything from the gold. Brother and sister smiled. Their faces immediately changed beyond recognition and made monstrous. These two turned into real monsters. The older brother is the first to decide to fight him and show what his family can do. In the end, Fatty intervened. He couldn't stand such insolence, so they're taking them for weaklings. But suddenly, everyone was interrupted by the arrival of one more guest. It was our acquaintance, Sayu, who calmly walked past these two closer to the bar. Then even Iron Mask was surprised. He couldn't believe that this guy was so calmly walking between the two heroes. It's a bit noisy in here. Sayu wanted to just relax and have a drink. But here it is. A fight is about to break out. There was silence in the inn for a second. No one present could tolerate such insolence, but they remained silent. Seeing that he was interrupting someone's conversation, Sayu said to just ignore him and let them chat, no big deal. She looked at the strange guy in surprise and asked who his brother was, but he didn't say anything. Ignoring all these looks at himself, Sayu ordered something to eat. He was terribly hungry after this trip, but the director said it was better to get out of here. This was a great chance. Iron Mask immediately started attacking the man, put two bony fingers forward. The hand approached with incredible speed, while one of the two heroes stood watching the strange guy. Suddenly, her older brother intervened. He pulled out his huge fan and swung it to repel the attack. The Iron Mask, who had not expected anything like this, received an incredible blow. A slight crunch was heard right in his hand. After such a strong blow, he could not stand on his feet and flew somewhere to the side, thrown away by a gust of wind. A fight broke out between the two. The older brother threw punches one after another, but the Iron Mask fought them all off. The two opponents were not inferior to each other. The mercenary waved his arms, and the rags he was wearing turned into real weapons. Catching the moment, the man stepped his foot right on the fan to push off and block the blow. He jumped high up. Quan didn't immediately notice his opponent going behind his back. Like a huge Iron Mask spider hung on the wall, his fingers dug into the wood, leaving several large cracks. Big Brother even laughed at this man running away like a frightened rabbit. How funny. Only smiling Iron Mask said that he had a very long tongue, and how could this family call themselves the strongest? There was a barely perceptible bang, and the wide-brimmed hat on the man's head shattered in two. In the same second, Iron Mask felt a monstrous blow fly right past him and cut off several shreds from his clothes. Quan turned to his sister and said that he would leave a squad of 100 skills to her. The fat man himself realized that these two were stronger than expected and would have to leave if they cared about their lives, but it was too late. At the last second, Fatty saw a hat whiz past him and cut through the air with a whistle, crashing straight into the wall. Across from him was Jean, a girl who was extremely dissatisfied with the fact that she was always getting some weaklings. With a slight movement of her hand, she drew her blade better them. Forget that thought, and prepare to accept her fate. Hearing such insolence, Fatty was like a wounded beast. He could not tolerate such humiliation. All the other mercenaries moved forward. They didn't care at this point who stood in front of them all to destroy. Meanwhile, the Iron Mask was moving at an incredible speed that even his eyes could not follow. The tractor was in a state of chaos as Sayu sat behind the bar and waited for something to eat. In a second, this entire inn risked turning into a battlefield with nothing left of this fragile building. When Sayu heard about the gold, he was interested. That's not bad. What kind of gold is this guy listening? In the end, there was a plate with fragrant noodles on the table in front of him, the smell of which filled the entire room. With 2 sticks picking up a few pieces of noodles, the guy started eating. The innkeeper asked, "So why doesn't he go somewhere else? The situation is heating up here," but it didn't seem to bother Saya at all. The guy kept eating and just listened to everything that was going on. He turned around and saw fighters running all over the inn hall, trying to send each other to the other side. Continuing to chew, Sayu pondered. These two are fighting for power over the entire province. The master was telling about it. Suddenly, an iron-masked man flew past the guy and hit the counter and broke several boards with his body. Looking at the strange stranger, Ji raised her eyebrow in surprise. What is he eating in such a situation? If he's so calm, then maybe he's trained in martial arts. The girl looked at him and paused for a second. All this time, Sayu was calmly drinking the broth and not paying attention to the chaos that was going on around him. As one of the two heroes hesitated, the Iron Mask immediately found himself behind her back and was already preparing his powerful lunges. But the girl reacted in time and bounced aside. The opponent immediately crashed into the floor. Everything around began to shake from such a blow. Jai was already distracted from the battle. She wasn't interested in the whole thing. She was more interested in this strange guy who was so calm. The girl stopped for a second and warned the strange stranger to leave the building, or it would be dangerous here. Hearing Sayu's voice, Sayu turned around and said to just ignore him. He will leave here as soon as he finishes, but for now, let him ignore him. He's a brave man. Ji glanced at him over her shoulder and smiled. Well, let him do what he wants, but don't get in the way. Meanwhile, Iron Mask had passed out for a couple seconds and was starting to come to his senses. Once the man realized what had happened, then immediately tensed up. Sayu looked at him with an indifferent look and sighed. Seeing the stranger in front of him, Iron Mask immediately prepared a strike. Could it be that he too was from the 100 Skills Squad? Seeing that he was in danger, Sayu began to twirl his wands in his hands. Well, if he wants to fight, so be it. As soon as the man's fingers and the 2 wands made contact, the whole air began to vibrate. As soon as he touched the chopsticks, an electric pulse went through the Iron Mask's entire body. Sayu didn't even get up from his seat while his opponent was already lying on the ground, completely exhausted. The boy sighed heavily and said that he expected more from such noble families, but apparently it wasn't fate. Meanwhile, the 2 opponents continued to fight. The entire inn shook from the endless blows. One way or another, the family will take all the gold a few dozen warriors fought right in this bar. Watching all of this, the fat man was beginning to realize that he had gotten into this battle for nothing. These people were too strong. If this continues, they will definitely be annihilated. 100 Skill Squad doesn't stand a chance against these opponents. As luck would have it, several people from the squad had already gone to the other world. What to do now? Fatty understood nothing at all. Finally, his nerves gave out, and the huge fat man swung his big fists ready to strike. After the fat man struck, the entire floor began to shake, and it seemed as if the entire building was about to collapse from just his blow. A large sound wave rose up and blew all the opponents apart in one blow. Looking at him with surprised eyes, Ji couldn't believe. Could this person really be this strong? Who is he even? Meanwhile, Fatty ran at her like an enraged buffalo, waving his big fists. He would never forget such humiliation. The man wanted to avenge his clan and prove his strength. Big Brother snapped his teeth. He got distracted from the fight and missed his only chance. His opponents immediately rushed after him, and he couldn't be missed. Several people immediately rushed out of the inn's window. All those who were standing outside watched in amazement as the monstrous battle took place. The fat man tried to run away, He realized he couldn't handle these monsters alone and tried to save his life. His ward tried to catch up with the fat man, but the boss was too fast and it was all to no avail. But no sooner had the unfortunate man taken a couple of steps than a sharp dagger appeared near his throat. It was only a few seconds later when Ji delivered a powerful blow and separated his head from his body in one fell swoop. Then the girl changed her face and vowed that she would find and send the fat man to the other side of the world. Eventually, when it was all over, the unfortunate innkeeper was barely breathing. He was lying on the wreckage of his counter. With 2 fingers, Sayu touched the old man. He apologized because martial arts cannot cure, so that was the end of it. After that, there was an immediate crack, and the unhappy old man immediately said goodbye to his life before he even realized what had happened. The boy looked at him with a sad look. The fighter said he couldn't cure his pain, but he could interrupt it. After all that happened, Sayu still got out of the inn and started to look at the tracks nearby. There were hooves and also wagon tracks. After walking a few more meters, the guy found some kind of cave. He pulled apart some tree roots and looked inside. What Sayu saw there shocked him. There would be countless treasures, a lot of gold, hidden in neat boxes. After a bit of thinking, the guy took a closer look. So that's what they've been looking for all this time, this gold reserve. Meanwhile, the Iron Mask came into a rage finally and began to destroy everything around the man, turned into a real demon in an attempt to destroy the opponent. Across from him stood the older brother of the 2 heroes. The man swung his fan and raised an entire whirlwind. As they came into contact, everything around them began to collapse. The fragile inn shattered into several pieces. The fat man now finally realizes that he's gotten into a very bad game. These 2 have been at odds and will now destroy everything around them. Big Brother said that their level is different, but the opponent still continues to fight. So, why? Iron Mask bellowed that he still had a lot to learn, need to catch the fat man immediately. Behind the man's back appeared the younger sister. She looked like a real ghost. The girl's eyes were burning. She flew past and rushed after the fat man. Everyone else just looked at her and didn't have time to say anything. In a hesitation, several Iron Mask warriors were annihilated in a second with one powerful strike. The fat man realized he was being hunted. The man stopped for a few seconds and turned back around. Big Brother still continued to fight with the Iron Mask. None of the opponents were going to give up. Ji's spiritual strength was simply unbelievable. The girl lifted the fat man by the neck with one hand and began to squeeze it. Meanwhile, Sayu calmly took some gold bars and put them in a small pouch for himself. The only thing left to do is to find out what to do with the rest of it. We can't let bad people get their hands on this gold, or else the end will come. The guy came out of the cave. What he saw in the village indicates that the Moyong family will come here first. Sayu realized that he wouldn't be able to take it all by himself, so it was better to seal. The guy pulled his hand forward and stored energy. It only took one blow to make the 2 rocks on either side of the guy crumble into ashes, forming a real rubble pile. At the last moment, the boy pushed himself off the ground and stopped on a branch. Observing the result of his actions, so much the better. Those who come here will search for a very long time. This is the provincial heritage, or as the guy looked in front of him. 2 opposing families fought over this legacy and laid down a lot of lives to get this place out of gold. The events moved to the village of Dariok. A huge temple stood on a mountain, and there were several windows burning. Someone was inside. There were several bodies lying in the street today. The family had lost many people in the battle. The chief stood and looked at it in silence. He knew whose hands it was, and it made anger boil in his chest. Masterman frowned. They had lost a lot of people today, very good and loyal warriors. The eldest son said that there was no point in standing and waiting to avenge the dishonored honor. Iron Mask said that it was his fault and demanded punishment in his direction, but the master didn't understand. What was the point? He couldn't do anything anyway. After a short pause, the master ordered all his students to prepare for the great battle before him. Already stood hundreds of the best warriors. Their eyes were burning with rage. Each of these men were ready to give their lives for their village and were preparing for the bloody battle. The master said that Iron Mask must stand in the forefront and prove his loyalty to punishment. Here is of no use. The man bowed and said that the table would do its duty at any cost, and a small pause hung between them. The master looked at him and smiled slightly. Yes, it will be so. But suddenly the man stopped for a second. He turned his attention to the body of one of the warriors and crouched down to him. Something happened. The man did not see any sword marks on the face of the defeated warrior. On the contrary, the skin was burnt. Iron Mask raised his head. He was asked, was there anyone else fighting the 2 heroes? Recalling a few events from the past, The man said there was another young man of about 20 years of age. Master calmed down. Yes, it was impossible to use such a technique at such a young age when someone else could. After learning what happened there, the master changed the existence of this demon could be the turning point in the coming battle against the Moyong family. Then the events moved to the village of Shenyang, where there was a fortress surrounded by a huge wall. The brother and sister returned to their home. They arrived quite late, which upset the master. The two stood before him. In front of the brother and sister stood a master man with a small beard and long hair. Judging from their appearance, he assumed that these two had not succeeded. Gongsun Song, hearing that he was disappointed, raised an eyebrow at what his brother meant. He hadn't expected anything from the start. The brother and sister remained silent and gritted their teeth. Well, enough talk. The father is waiting for an audience. The doors swung open, and an old man appeared on the threshold. He took a few steps closer. Brother and sister leaned in. The old man stood staring off into the distance with his back turned. He hadn't said a word yet. It was the leader of the family named Dong Sheon. The man frowned and looked at his wards with a searching look. The eldest brother decided to take the blame and apologized to the elder and said it was all his fault. He was about to say something else to ask for an opportunity for revenge, but the elder interrupted him. The man stung his left hand and fingers, and from his hand began to emanate an incredible energy that filled the entire room. Immediately a spasm formed on the older brother's neck. The man was barely breathing. He clenched his teeth and tried to break free. Her sister was horrified when she saw this and wanted to help her brother, but she couldn't do anything. Her body felt numb. The elder continued to hold him with that grip, and the elder brother only shouted and wheezed. Father was obviously very upset. How could he entrust such a dangerous business to someone with such an attitude? The sister wanted to stop the two, but the family member blocked her path with his hand in front of her. Gongsun ordered, "Do not interfere." The man looked at her with a piercing gaze, letting her know it was best to back off. Meanwhile, the father continued to tell his son if he knew why their family had chosen to shut themselves off from the outside world for years. The thing is, everyone in the world thought their family was the second of the Great Five and thought their family would lead the entire league. The head of the family got rid of everyone who got in his way. He had to go over their heads, leaving behind only misery. He wasn't doing this for the League of Five Dragons. He wanted the entire Iron Union to kneel before them just for this. In a quick motion, the father leaned his son against the windowsill, smashing his nose, and asked what he saw. Looking out of the window, the guy barely breathing said he could see a cave on the mountain, that's all. He was completely right. There was the Northern Mountain Range Heritage Cave that could destroy the League of Five Dragons. Suddenly, Gunsung intervened. He asked his father to be a little calmer. The man was sure that the younger man understood the seriousness of the matter. The plan will soon be finalized. Father will get his gold through the Steel Horse Bureau, and all will be well. After a bit of silence, the elder said that these two would be removed from the case and would oversee the territories. His older brother had no choice but to agree. He gritted his teeth and said he would remember it. The elder bent down in front of the others and said that he had waited 2 decades, and now there was only one step left. The man squeezed his hand hard enough to break a piece off the windowsill in one motion. Then they will also take that final step and bring the entire world to its knees. The elder laughed like a psychopath. And now Sayu was in his dream. He heard some strange voice, a very familiar voice he remembered from long ago. San's face appeared in front of my eyes again, asking me to take care of his sister before falling into the gorge. The boy tried to save him, but he failed again. He lost one of his loved ones. And behind his back, he still had the little girl he still couldn't save, taken away by those demons. Mu yelled for the boy to go immediately save his life now. Sayu turned his head. He heard a familiar voice and tried to save her, but all was to no avail. The boy's hands were chained again, and he couldn't move, no matter how hard he tried to break free. Chains entangled his entire body. The unfortunate man watched as he could do nothing. And so the unfortunate boy hangs again, suspended from chains, and awaits his fate. The old man stood before him again, but he was different from the master who had taught the boy. This man's face was the one who kidnapped Muo. He smiled and said he liked it better. It was a real nightmare. Eventually, the poor man woke up. He was breathing heavily in his eyes. There was incredible pain and longing with resentment. The boy lay on the soft grass near the fire and rested. Sayu looked in front of him for a few more seconds and couldn't figure out where he was. Pulling his head up, the poor man rose to the ground and began to ponder. These two were giving him the same nightmares again. Suddenly, the silhouette of some man in a long hat appeared behind him, his eyes hidden in the shadows. The stranger looked at the boy. After him, there were a dozen more of them. They just stood there, silently looking at the strange guy without saying a word. After a brief pause, one of the men greeted and introduced himself. His name was Mac. He was from the Steel Horse sect. A few wagons appeared nearby, and a lot of people the chief said they needed to find a place to stay. One of the cult members said he wanted to set up a camp nearby for a small overnight stay. Sayu introduced himself and said they could stop here because it's free. Yes, and he doesn't care. In a few minutes, a fire was built, and in a cauldron, a fragrant soup was already boiling, the smell of which was spreading all around. They sat around the fire and talked. Max said he wanted to travel too when he was young. Sayu corrected him and said he was 26 now. Hearing such a thing, Mac immediately apologized for such rudeness. They're only a couple of years apart, it turns out. Looking at him with a tired look, Sayu said that it's no big deal, everything is fine. Holding out a plate of flavorful soup to the boy, one of the men apologized for his older brother. He doesn't quite know how to communicate with people. Accepting the offering, Sayu thanked the benefactors and said that as soon as they met, he had already become a debtor, it turns out. The man laughed and said it didn't matter. It's not Sayu's debt. By the way, the boy can call him brother if he wants. The man explained that all these people were heading to Shenyang. It would be bad if they were attacked by bandits or something along the way. On such an open hill, one can easily defend themselves, and people hope Sayu will understand them and not consider them rude. Hearing about this place, Sayu wondered if it was because of the Moyong family. They've been making a lot of noise lately. Apologizing, the man said that although they owed the boy a debt of gratitude, they could not share such sensitive information. Customer trust. That's what the cult stands on, said the man, stirring the soup in his bowl. Without much enthusiasm, Sayu apologized and expressed his understanding. Yes, and basically, he wasn't really interested. By the way, he's also going in the same direction Sayu said he needed something, and asked where the cult gets its information from. Traveler pondered it. Depends on what you want to learn. Usually it's a public and weak community. Followers of such communities are usually because of low class, but that doesn't mean they don't have enough influence. You never know who's going to attack you, or who you'll have to defend yourself against. The merchant explained that now Shenyang was on the verge of a big battle, but it was best not to go there at all. It was a very dangerous venture. Well, that's what we needed to know. Sayu thanked for the information and missed the eyes. Now the matter was cleared up. Seeing such a confident smile, the man even turned a little cold with fear of how one could smile so confidently in such a situation. The next morning, the whole caravan moved onto the road. Max said that the future was behind the Iron Union, their building covered as much as 4 kilometers. Max said he thinks the Iron Alliance will take over the entire mainland. Hearing about the Iron Union, Sayu thought again. He had heard that name too often lately. Looking at his companion in surprise, Mac raised an eyebrow. Doesn't this guy know anything about the Iron Union? The man laughed. Apparently this kid hadn't been to the mainland for a long time and didn't know anything, and immediately began to explain the local situation. Hearing about the sects that dominate the continent, the young man wondered how strong they were. Turns out they're the best of the best Rainblade. Saint named Yun is one of the strongest warriors on the planet. Single sword tyrant Chul. He is the head of the Lion Union, although he is weaker than the previous ones. Although between all these sects, it's not that big of a difference how strong they are. That's the best of the best. Again, beginning to ponder, Sayu remembered that the master had also told of such people he called hermits. Sitting on the wagon, the boy pondered, and so because of the power of the heavenly weapons, the master was called an evil spirit because he exterminated them. A thought popped into the guy's head, wondering what would happen if the master fought these alliances. Who would win? Sayu was pulled out of his thoughts by the smell of blood. I wonder where it's coming from, if the enemy is nearby. From somewhere, a rider appeared. He shouted to his brother that he had discovered something. The man tensed for a second. The rider said he discovered the bodies of fallen warriors who belonged to their sect. The elder was frightened, and Sayu only looked at the rider with indifference. After all, something had happened, as expected. The group stopped near a ravine where the bodies of people were lying there. Some of them had clothes like the Moyong family, and some were just ordinary travelers. Looking closely, Sayu recognized one of these men as a man from Goryeo. The clothes were very similar. The warden said to hurry up and get out of the place before disaster strikes. Everybody stay together. The cart sped up, and Sayu remained sitting there. I don't know why everyone was so reliant. All this time, the boy was pondering about that strange man who wore the familiar clothes he had come. Such a long way to make a traveler. One of the writers shouted that these people had done nothing wrong. Who knows what the intentions of the Moyong family are? One of the warriors said that he could already see the bronze dragon statue, so they were approaching and on the right path. Hearing about this statue, Sayu's mind went back to thinking about it. He was new to this place and didn't understand how things were done on the continent. Indeed, on one of the coals stood a statue of a black dragon made of bronze. To tell the truth, there used to be two of them. A dozen years ago, one of the statues collapsed. No one knows why, but there's only been one dragon here ever since. Turning around and looking at the piece of bronze instead of a dragon, the boy began to ponder. Did the master really do it? They were already approaching Shenyang and all the answers were there. They just had to look hard to find the city already visible in the distance. A few minutes later, I had already passed through the gates and was inside the huge city. Folding his hands in front of him, Sayu thanked the travelers. Thanks to these people, he made it safely. Mac, who was standing in front of him, also bowed and said that the boy was a good conversationalist. May he have a cloudless road. Suddenly, Sayu was hugged by one of the travelers by the shoulder and said that they should have a drink sometime, but unfortunately have to go. With a wink to his traveling companion, the merchant wished him good luck in his upcoming quest. The caravan moved further into the city, leaving the traveler alone on an empty street. For a few more minutes, Sayu stood where he was, staring blankly at the departing caravan. It was time to go. The boy looked around. This city was new to him, and the boy didn't even know where to start. Pushing himself off the ground, he took quick leaps to climb up one of the buildings to watch the surroundings. Stopping on the roof of one of the houses, Sayu looked around, and this place was pretty good, as for a city. Perhaps the guy would have been looking around, but suddenly he heard someone's cry for help coming from the city. Looking closely, he saw several men engaged in beating the unfortunate man. They were beating some teenager. Apparently there were 3 people there who were quite grown up. Listening in, Sayu recognized the familiar dialect would need to see what was going on there. The unhappy child was shutting down and screaming that he needed to find his daddy and his mommy was very sick. But the adult man didn't want to listen to anything, and with his eyes bulging, he continued beating the unfortunate child with screaming. Sayu suddenly appeared as if out of thin air. He made a snap of his fingers, and after accumulating energy, he struck straight into the stick. The club with which the man was beating the unfortunate child immediately cracked into splinters, and the bandit looked at him in horror. Next, a finger charged with energy touched the man's forehead. The bandit didn't even have time to realize anything. It only took a couple seconds for the entire pack of bandits to scatter in different directions like rag dolls. Sayu decided to stand up for the child. The little child was sitting on the ground and didn't understand anything. The boy looked at his savior with frightened eyes and was ready to give up his life when suddenly someone came to his rescue. Looking at the child with a calm gaze, Sayu asked the cub if he was from Goryeo. He had a familiar dialect after all. Old man Hong was sitting on the roof of one of the houses, pouring himself another round of alcohol. The old man smiled with his toothless mouth when he saw the strange and very familiar movements. One of the criminals finally came to his senses, and upon seeing his assailant, he became furious at how dare he interfere. Armed with another stick, the man started swinging like a monkey and tried to attack. With one deft movement, Sayu grabbed his arm and began to fill his body with energy, and a slight crunch was heard. The man felt his whole arm begin to wriggle like a snake. An incredible pain pierced his entire body. Looking at his opponent, Sayu asked what this innocent child had done to them in the first place, that they had gotten this far. The old man continued to sit and watch. In a squeaky voice, he said that this child, despite all warnings, had trespassed. Smiling again, the old man said he was a wise man named Hong. Who's that? Looking at him over his shoulder, Sayu introduced himself and wondered, what does a wise man mean? So far, he looks like some kind of drunkard. The old man, meanwhile, continued. He asked to let these people go. Of course they are bad, but don't make handicappers out of them. After listening to all this, the guy twisted the offender's arm even harder, and there was an even louder crunch. The man continued to scream in pain, but he could do nothing about it. Smiling again, the old man agreed yes, but it's not worth wasting time on these poor people, and the child is already safe. Smiling slightly, Sayu said that this is quite a cunning old man. What does he want? What he is so clingy about? But eventually, the guy did let go of the bandit's hand. The man immediately grabbed his limbs, started screaming. Laughing even harder, the old man thanked the young man for his understanding and knew that this guy would hear him. Ignoring this, Sayu looked at the child and asked what the boy's name was. The child frowned and said in a serious voice that his name was Oh Sungwoo, but he was still afraid of you. Taking the child by the shoulders, Sayu took him home. His mom is sick. Well, we should go and see her. Meanwhile, holding onto his wounded arm, the bandit asked the elder why he didn't intervene and let him go. The old man only laughed. The man's mouth foamed. Only now he realized the danger he was in. This man could have destroyed him. The moment the old man saw those graceful hands, he immediately realized that he was the one he was looking for. Just like that day 10 years ago, the alcoholic smiled his toothless smile and laughed. Then many years ago, at the bronze statue of the Black Dragon, he saw an old man who had the same hands. This man was silent and thoughtful. Then the old man remembered him for life. Who knows how long he stood there. But this person still had long and thin arms that emitted the same light. As soon as the elder saw such power with which this old man broke the statue, his feeble imagination. It had been many years since then, but the old man had not said a word. He was still silent. Meanwhile, a few fighters were returning to Moyong Manor, and one of them wanted to rest a bit to unwind. But they had a battle to fight. Before he could finish his word, someone suddenly appeared out of nowhere and sent the man to the other world in one fell swoop. The poor guy didn't even have time to realize the man in the iron mask suit had instantly taken his life without even giving him a chance to fight back. The fighters immediately got ready as this madman only managed to provoke their family completely lost their minds. But the man didn't even listen. He ordered his fighters to take out the 6 first and then take their head immediately. Everything happened just as Da Ryok's father said it would. Da Ryok discovered them and attacked the man, looked at the bodies of the defeated warriors. The deputy head asked how things were going. He received only silence. Probably everything was bad. After thinking for a bit, Big Brother said that there were mass skirmishes and battles going on all over the city right now. The deputy smiled. It seems the enemy isn't as stupid as it seemed they have scattered their fighters all over the city. Suddenly, there was a sister. The girl jumped with incredible ease and was closer. Hearing that a valiant warrior of the North Wind had appeared, the men became alarmed as to what this meant. It appeared the Lions Union had decided to actually interfere with her older brother, looked at her with a concerned look that, well, then there were no options. The man's gaze looked very worried. "We should get on it," said he, this man on Daryuk's side. Meanwhile, stale fingers touched the woman's delicate hand, but the body gave no sign of life. In some old man. Apparently, the healer was tending to a woman who was lying on a bed and breathing heavily. The man said that the case was not easy. Sayu and his new acquaintance stood and watched. It was probably the boy's mom. The poor child looked at his mother with frightened eyes. He feared the worst and trembled all over his body. The old man said he needed wild ginseng root and some other medicine to cure him, so it's all about money. The guy took 1 gold bar out of his pocket and loudly placed it on the table. When the man saw the money, he fidgeted and fixed his hat and disappeared somewhere in the back of the house. He will do everything, and then he will come back. The kid and Sayu were left alone. The kid promised to cure his mom. Seeing the tears on the child's face, the young man said that if he was also from Goryeo, he shouldn't cry. Not just now, but I'll never again. The boy was still trying to cope with his feelings, tears streaming down his cheeks. After that, Sayu headed to the room. He was sitting at the table and looking somewhere far away out the window. He was thinking about the Moyong family. He liked these people less and less because of the many unrelated events this clan was involved in. The child decided to tell his life story. His father was a merchant and then disappeared, and so did his acquaintances. The child's face became serious. Then his father asked him to investigate and find out what really happened. Hearing that they had been dragged into the cave, Sayu tensed up a bit, though he still listened to the kid's story without much enthusiasm. Next to him sat another silhouette. It was the same old alcoholic man he was chasing these two for some reason. Leaning on the table, the old man asked what this guy was thinking about so much. Something was bothering him. Sayu Said, he knows the old man overheard them talking about the missing. So what does he think about it? Hearing that this old man had information. Where is the cave? Sayu tensed up and looked at him over his shoulder but didn't say anything. Stretching. In a toothless smile, the old man laughed. Well, it's not free. If the boy has gold, then so be it, he will say. Suddenly, their not-long conversation was interrupted by footsteps of someone entering the room without knocking. It was the same Cheol of the Lion Clan man standing in full battle gear right on the doorstep, but didn't say anything. His face was completely calm and serious, but still he was concentrated and watching the two. The valiant warrior of the North Wind is what everyone says. T said not a word. He greeted the master and said that they hadn't seen each other for a long time, and the man across the hall perked up. The master folded his hands in front of him and welcomed the honored guest. They were honored to have a valiant warrior visit them. Chul looked at him and slanted his eyes a little. It had been a while since they'd seen each other after all. The master suggested sitting down at a small table and discussing everything thoroughly. There were already several chairs nearby. Bowing, the warrior thanked for the kindness, but he had some information he would have to share. Elder Hong smiled as soon as he was greeted. Do they still remember his name here? After the master heard who was standing in front of him, and that this decrepit old man was indeed an elder, he tensed his entire body. When he looked at him and noticed his fright, Cheol only smiled, but it seemed that the family didn't know about it. Gong greeted the elder and folded his hands in front of him. He apologized for his rudeness. Looking at the strange old man, Sayu was surprised. So he is an elder and lives in such a place. The alcoholic only laughed. That's how amazing he is. Sayu thought about it and tensed up a bit. The situation was getting more complicated. He stopped understanding anything at all. The master frowned and said that a battle was about to break out between the families. So which side would the valiant warrior of the North Wind be on? After thinking for a bit, the fighter said that the tyrant of the Lone Blade hoped that there would be no recent disagreements between the families. The man added that what happened here was probably carefully planned by someone. The master frowned again and suggested that perhaps they were suspected of this. Turning to him, Cheol was a little indignant. How could he even think about it? Then the master didn't dare to delay them any longer and turned around and left. Finally, the man asked the warrior to take care of himself, for times were hard. Walking out of the room, Gong pondered, does the warrior think he'll avoid battle but nothing that scares him? There was a smile on the man's face that let the valiant warrior of the North Wind enjoy his last day properly. The old man asked his new acquaintance how his father Cheol. Thank you for your concern. He said he's fine. And besides, the master looks younger. Looking at Sayu, the man greeted him and introduced himself. He tensed his whole body and waited for something. After a short pause, Sayu said his name without much enthusiasm and lowered his gaze slightly. The warrior looked closer and saw that there was no energy emanating from this boy. Yes, and besides, if this person is together with the sage, it is necessary to be as careful with him as possible. Sayu continued to watch. Putting his hands behind his head, the old man thought that the warrior seemed to have one thing to do with him. Will the Gaben get involved in this conflict? Will he not? The man was even a little surprised at this awareness of how quickly information spreads. Frowning, he said his father would do anything to prevent this feud and the whole battle. The old man said thoughtfully that if the tiger wanted it, he could be sure that the Gaben would not be involved in any way. Anyway, Chol said he had to go now and bowed out of the room. The man stepped outside and looked up at the full moon that spread across almost the entire sky. He realized that he was not alone here. It had been a long time since they had seen the head of Daryuk village, and several silhouettes appeared behind the man's back. Literally out of the ground from behind, man grew up and asked if the warrior had recognized what they were up to, but the man said the two had nothing to do with it. Behind the back were also a brother and sister. They nervously glanced among themselves and pondered the situation coming to light. The North Wind warrior smiled and said that since this was the case, it should be over with as soon as possible. We need to go and take back their sovereignty soon since it's inevitable. The old man, along with Sayu, were standing on the balcony at this time. The elder was wondering where the boy would go today. It seemed that tonight would be a particularly long night. The elder was looking off into the distance, but his companion remained silent. Suddenly, the kid literally vanished into thin air. Hong did not even have time to understand anything and only turned his head. Sayu walked through the air, barely touching his feet. The old man expressed his desire to go along with him in that case. There was tension in the Moyoung family. Everything happened just as father said it would. Now, I know what they want. The two unions united. The old man frowned. Everything happened just as he had predicted. Now, they would want to take over the entire continent. There is one more thing, the man smiled. Sage Gaeben appeared in the city. He promised not to interfere in other people's affairs, but you have to be careful. After saying these words, it was as if the old man had lost his mind. They had to break through and stand on top of the Iron Union without fail. In front of him lay two circles with blades. The old man stood in front of the table and shouted that it was necessary to destroy the opponents. This whole world would tremble at his feet. All this time, Sayu was going somewhere. He had no idea what dark deeds were going on behind his back. Suddenly, a whole wagon train with several carts and a bunch of riders rode out of the gates of the city. The man from the Steel Horse Union surveyed the surroundings with his inquisitive gaze. What a relief. Sayu hoped they weren't involved in this conflict. He had already made friends with these people. Where did you come from, the old man, and wondered what was going on here. He followed the boy's footsteps without lagging a step behind. Here inside, everything was on fire, with several people lying breathless everywhere. Fire spread everywhere. Someone had done a good job of managing the place. These people became food for crows. A huge black raven opened its sharp beak and started screaming. Along with his companion, Sayu walked between the ashes. If he had approached a little, rather, this tragedy would not have happened. Eventually, they came to the Northridge Cave. Two companions stood in front of the open gate from where I was coming off the smoke. There was a battle. Several people fought among themselves without sparing their lives. Iron Mask and his underlings wanted to destroy the Mo Young family. The man screamed like a madman. He wanted to make amends. The men of the Mo Young clan were eager to fight. They had to defend the cave at all costs. But even with all their efforts, the opponents were much stronger and faster, and their forces were not equal. The North Wind warrior swung his blade and used a ferocious lion strike, scattering everyone around. They flew into the air like ragdolls and lost their lives. Even though they managed to prevail, the warrior noticed that the opponents were surprisingly coordinated and acted correctly. The warriors fell one after another. They were subjected to monstrous blows from which it was impossible to dodge. Masterman noticed at the last moment that a wisp of lightning was flying at him and dodged to the side, moving away from the line of attack. The man was holding onto his wounded arm and breathing heavily. He was fine, but had not expected such a sudden attack. They were dressed in black clothes and had wide hats on their heads. Here came the head of the Mo Young family. The man was furious when he saw the invaders sneaking into his sacred place. There was a fierce smile on his face. The man had finally met his worst enemy and was now apologizing for this humiliation. When Sayu entered the cave, the first thing he saw was a large number of lifeless bodies lying there. So this is what they are after. The fools from Daryuk went to the other world for nothing. So many people lost, and for what? The two companions were moving deeper into the cave, and the old man said they couldn't just stand there and watch with their eyes closed. After thinking for a little while in a trembling voice, the sage asked, "Does the boy also want to take possession of the northern range?" Sayu walked forward a bit and asked where the old man got it from. Hong wondered if he needed it or what. Without delay, the young man replied that he didn't care about this mountain range. He had his own motives for this life. But it's a valuable resource for studying martial arts. Isn't it normal that they're so eager to get their hands on it? Before the old man could finish his sentence, a huge block of stone swept past him and crashed into the wall. It was followed by another, but this time the man reacted and put his hands forward to block the blow. Suddenly, Sayu's hand appeared from somewhere, and with one touch, he shocked Starikov. The bolts of lightning turned the rock into a pile of rubble, and the old man bounced backwards, covering himself with his hands in fear. Sayu noticed the fear on the old man's face. It was his heavenly weapon. No one could defeat him. Going deep into the cave, they saw a huge lake. Here's something they didn't expect. The old man opened his eyes in amazement at how inside the cave there was a lake and an island. In addition, the head of the Dawn family male was there applying some kind of spell and was about to deliver a crushing blow. By all appearances, they are fighting. The old man asked his companion how the guy would act. For now, Sayu remained silent. Not a second later, the guy took off from his seat and flew there like a bird, without leaving the old man a chance to say a word. The elder only scratched the back of his head. He just couldn't believe that the strongest masters in history were fighting in front of his eyes right now. There were also steel cages with people in them, and here are the missing people who have been missing for so long. Seeing this, the old man could not contain the surprise on his face, so this is where the people had gone all these years. With just a finger touching the rock, Sayu instantly broke it into a pile of rocks. Master Dawn looked in the direction of the strange boy. Who is this? Even where did he come from? And beside him, the elder Gaben, from whence he came here, and how they found their way here. The guy kept touching the rock, flashing the cages, and turning them into shreds of metal. People were freed. Looking at the captives, Sayu asked the father of the boy named Sungwoon is here or not. The guy's eyes were piercing. One of the people imprisoned in the cages recognized his familiar dialect and asked where the strange man was from. He was answered by an emaciated man with a sparse beard on his face. He had heard about his son and was getting worried. Tears came to the man's eyes as soon as he heard his son was safe and sound, and his wife also survived. The man knelt before his savior and began to thank him from the bottom of his heart. He read about hundreds of innocent people being tortured and left here forever. Hearing Dawn Elder's name, He wondered if the sect leader had set it all up. Then the matter was clear. From somewhere, a brother and sister appeared. They saw the invaders and asked how it was that these two let slaves into the heart of their territory. The brother and sister saw a familiar face and froze in place. It was the same man they had seen in the bar. Sayu looked at them with a calm gaze and didn't say a word. He knew in his heart that there was going to be a fight. Ji looked at him and frowned. This old man from Gaben. What is he doing here, and why with this young man? The old man's been heard of a lot, so he'll be a tough opponent. There were several fighters standing nearby. This was the Moyong family's elite squad, so to speak, the Royal Guards. They were involved in special operations. A matter of a couple steps forward, Sayu told the old man to take care of the others, and he himself would deal with these two. Finally, he said he had to see the head of the family. The boy took small steps. One of the elite squad came forward. How dare this man call the name of his master that is sick of living? The man pulled out a huge sword and said that he would personally take the head of this insolent man and bring it to the master as a gift. With a calm voice, Sayu ordered to get out of the way. He wasn't even embarrassed that he was facing armed opponents. The elite fighter swung his blade. Good, if this guy is that cocky. Yeah, let him try to pass. Seeing such a monstrous technique, the elder was dumbfounded, and he couldn't think that this fanatic had gotten to such a point. Meanwhile, the young warrior was coming closer and closer. He saw his opponent and smiled. In a second, the young man's entire body was covered in lightning. He swung around and prepared to strike with incredible force. After that, the elder was truly horrified, even though he had lived on this earth for several decades, but he had never seen such a thing. After walking a few steps, Sayu hit his opponent with such force that the man began to ignite before his eyes. The young man's eyes lit up. He said that in that case, he would have to bet his life if he wanted to stop. At some point, the fighter noticed that the very same twins had formed behind him, holding swords in their hands. A smile touched his lips, so they also want to leave here in their lives. So be it. With just a wave of his hand, Sayu filled the entire space of the cave with an aura that made the rocks begin to crumble and turn to dust. Immediately, the two twins headed towards the old man. One of them swung his blade in an attempt to strike, but the man dodged. He bounced somewhere far away and moved extremely clumsily, even though he was considered a master. Smiling, the old drunkard told them to leave the boy alone, as they could have a wonderful time together. Then looking at his companion, the master asked what he had forgotten. Here, let him go quickly and meet the master. Meanwhile, several assassins were already flying down from above like birds of prey that had seen their prey. A smirk appeared on Sayu's face by itself, already anticipating his good fight. These people were no match for him. With just one movement of his hand, he turned the limb of one of his opponents into jelly with a single touch. The next blow, and the man is already flying sideways, turning into a piece of tissue under the most powerful pressure. Another blow reached the jaw of one of the fighters. The machine bit its tongue and said goodbye to several teeth at once. The elite fighter couldn't believe that they were facing such a person, how this young man had so much strength. Swinging his blade, the man already prepared to strike. His blade shone, just like the moon in the night sky. At the last moment, Sayu noticed the danger flying straight at his face and dodged without much difficulty. After such a blow, the air began to blur and turned into liquid. The man was incredibly strong. But even he, with all his experience, couldn't understand where this kid disappeared to. He literally vanished into thin air. Then suddenly someone grabbed his arm. The fighter felt his steel armor begin to crack like paper. Another hand grasped his neck. His breathing instantly cut off as if someone had stepped on his throat with a foot. Grasping his opponent with both hands, Sayu somersaulted and leapt over him in one motion. His hands burned from the overabundance of energy, and covered in a blue glow, the guy prepared to strike. A clap was heard, and a long blade passed through the bodies of several fighters at once, taking their lives instantly. And only then did the elite fighters realize that they were dealing with a very dangerous opponent with inhuman strength. We must be careful. In turn, the young master was just warming up. He got ready and stood in a fighting stance, raising the stones up. The guy accelerated and scattered all his opponents like puppets with an energy wave. The fighters couldn't understand what was going on. Their weapons were useless. They couldn't even keep track of this kid. One of the warriors wanted to strike his opponent with his blade, but Sayu only stopped the blade with 2 fingers without much effort. The next moment, the unfortunate fighter felt an inhuman wave of force pass through his arm, and his entire body convulsed. Even though they were losing men one by one, the fighters were raring to attack. They must stop the invaders at any cost, no matter what it takes. Stepping on the ground, Sayu lifted several stones into the air in one fell swoop and prepared to launch them at the enemy. All attempts to approach him were futile, and the warriors flew away under the pressure of the powerful energy. It was as if they were in a fog and could see nothing. One fighter after another fell without signs of life. Sayu's movements were as fluid as if he was dancing. The guy was effortlessly taking down elite fighters. The squad leader bounced aside and ordered the men to regroup. This man is too strong for them to handle alone. Sayu looked at them from the side in the boy's eyes. They moved incredibly slowly. He anticipated any movement. Around him, some scraps of cloth began to swirl. The fighters turned into something invisible and approached the victim. Then out of that darkness, several huge blades appeared and moved straight towards the face of the unfortunate guy who had been standing motionless all this time. And then there was an explosion. A bright flash of light illuminated all this darkness, scattering all the people around like toys. The old drunk looking at it all from the outside was just shocked. He didn't expect such power from this frail guy. The brother and sister who wanted to attack him pulled back and watched this power with horror. The wind reached these three people barely had time to stand on their feet to avoid falling down. The power was truly colossal. Her older brother ordered Ji to head to her father immediately. The girl nodded her head and turned back. Seeing that one of these two was aiming at him, the old man prepared to fight for a long time. This is a serious opponent, it turns out. The older brother created a vortex of energy and threw the old man back before he could even realize it. Hong was even a little offended. What kind of a bunch of assholes think they can do anything with an old man? Where did you come from? A large rope turned into a whip and hit the man on the arm. He put out a fan instantly. Slaps were heard. Brother and sister received a few swift blows and flew off to the sides. The old man proved not to be so easy with his whip. He kept his distance and showered his opponents with blows. A smile stretched across his face again. Today, Hong would let them know what his fighting style tasted like. One of the elite fighters received a powerful punch right in the face. The man clenched his eyes and prepared to accept the inevitable. The head of the Moyong family was truly furious. He wasn't going to let go alive any of those who had invaded his domain. Chul clenched his teeth and looked at his opponent. He realized that the strength was not equal to this elder. He cried out that Don was a dishonorable man. He had gotten to this point and had completely lost his mind. The man was moving right at his opponent. He swung his blade in an attempt to strike the old man and finally destroy this spawn of evil. Several opponents were moving at the elder from several directions. The old man stood in his place and waited for the blow without moving. Master Man suddenly saw something. Unexpectedly, the man froze in his seat and felt a strong shock. The old man put his hand forward and prepared to strike. His expression changed, and his eyes began to glow like a demon's. And now the old man's bony but strong hands grasped the neck of the unfortunate craftsman with such force that his breath was cut off. The old man held the man over the cliff. He was prepared to lower him somewhere down into the abyss. No one dare stand in his way. Suddenly the master sensed some movement and turned around behind his back. Where only the rest of the war, he flashed his opponent to the ground. The exceptional swordsman he had trained for several decades had already been destroyed. The old man's face changed with fear. In front of him stood none other than Sayu. The boy looked at him with burning eyes, energy spreading around him. Deputy Head Muyong squinted at Hu. This kid is, even this kind of person from somewhere knows such a secret technique. Shultu also raised an eyebrow in surprise. In his long life, he had never seen anything like this once. Who is this person? Looking up at his opponents from below, Sayu told the old man to start saying something already because it would be his last words. Surprisingly to himself, the experienced Cheol at the sight of this kid felt fear for the first time in his life. He feared for his life. Sayu stood and calmly looked at them. This man had dealt single-handedly with elite fighters and was incredibly calm, present sepulchral silence. The second person in the Moyong family rushed towards the noble warrior and struck him straight into the blade. He is his opponent. The man flew aside from such a strong blow and did not even manage to stay on his feet. The fighter's face reflected fear mixed with rage as he fought a truly experienced opponent worth the effort to at least stay alive. Gongsun looked at him with disdain. He already saw him as his prey and was not going to back down. Cheol asked, is he wondering if he was worthy of becoming the strongest? Suddenly, the fighter's face changed. He was covered in energy. His eyes glowed purple like a demon. At this time, the head of the family raised another weapon in his hands and was about to throw it at the insolent kid. He swung around, and above the old man's head appeared a vortex of energy that he was about to launch directly at his opponent. A rumbling sound was heard as the old man put his hand forward and prepared to attack. His eyes shone like two lanterns. Despite the monstrous danger, Sayu stood still and only watched as the tangle of blades flew at him. The guy put his hand forward and blocked this monstrous weapon with a single movement, and without even raising an eyebrow, a monstrous explosion was heard. His face remained just as calm, not a single muscle trembled when the boy stopped that monstrous blow. The blast wave reached even the old man. He could barely stand on his feet and couldn't believe his eyes. Who is this child that has such power? At that time, the guy was holding the round blade in his hands with only one finger. He didn't even move from his seat the entire time. When the old man heard where the gold had gone, he was horrified to hear it was the same guy who took the treasure. When Sayu found out what this was all about, he was surprised that so many people were sacrificed for these toys. What a stupid thing to do. He didn't need them anymore. The guy opened his arms and launched the huge blade back at his opponent. The old man, who had not expected anything like this, just stood there in a daze and waited for his time. After the monstrous explosion, the head of the family saw that the temple was collapsing. He could not withstand such a strong onslaught. Another blow followed, and the man struggled to block it and felt incredible pressure. This was impossible. A top-level martial artist felt a tremor in his entire body, as if he was afraid of something. He still stood his ground and watched as a tangle of blades of rage swirled above him and obscured his eyes. Looking at the tormentor of so many people, Sayu was getting angry. Let the old man not hope for a quick end. It would be very painful. Swinging, the boy struck his hand straight into the ground, causing an earthquake. For a few seconds. Energy scattered around. Sayu wanted the old man to feel the pain and know what it was like for those unfortunate residents. Pushing off the ground, the guy ran at great speed, turning into a real demon. Now no one will leave alive. Master Dawn, seeing such insolence, he began to scatter his weapons in an attempt to at least somehow defend himself against the attackers. Looking at the ball of blades flying at him, Sayu didn't even raise an eyebrow as he continued to run forward without seeing the danger. In a split second, the guy dodged and went sideways with a whoosh. Several blades flew around him. This is not a trick. Sayu looked at his opponent with a piercing gaze and frowned. Now, he will see what kind of trick this is. In one motion, the guy bounced off the ground and headed towards the old man at breakneck speed. The frightened master raised his head, and the opponent flew at him, swinging his legs around and moving too fast to be tracked. At one point, the old man noticed the boy's hand approaching him at breakneck speed, and goosebumps ran down his spine from such force. There was a pop and an explosion as the old man flew aside at a tremendous speed, and a shiver ran through his entire body. But this old master could not tolerate it. He put his hands forward and began to accumulate energy for a retaliatory strike. Despite his best efforts, Sayu dodged any attacks and approached the old man at breakneck speed. Master Dong realized that he was in a desperate situation and gathered all his strength in his hands to somehow stop this monster. A few quick blows, and the boy's entire body was covered in cuts, but he didn't stop, surprisingly. When the old man saw that he had made it, the old man began to celebrate. Now, this kid still believes in his power. It wasn't over yet. The opponent soared up above the old man and prepared to strike. The master raised his head in surprise. Beneath him, with a quick movement, the boy pushed himself away from his opponent's arms and did a back somersault. Concentrating a colossal amount of energy in his hands, Sayu prepared to send that annoying old man to the afterlife. After all, it was only enough for the old master to feel an entire vortex, more piercing his entire body. The boy's hand touched his arm and sent incredible energy throughout his body. The old man didn't know what to do. After the monstrous explosion, a piece of the old man's beard simply vaporized. One of his eyes was already red from the strain, and pain spread throughout his body. Standing beside him, Sayu swung around and prepared to deliver a monstrous blow. The boy had only a smirk on his face. He knew that this old man was no match for him, and the fight would be over very quickly. At this time, another battle was going on. Chul stabbed Gun with a dagger right in the face. The experienced fighter smiled, and this man couldn't take a punch, and is still questioning the strength. Looking at his opponent, Gong only frowned. He didn't know what to say, and realized that the forces were not equal. They rushed towards each other again and began to swing their blades. The final blow was to take place. Suddenly, some ray of energy flew past the men. They immediately stopped and looked away. Immediately, forgetting about their fight, both opponents looked in the direction from where the rumbling sound came from. What was that terrifying force? There, they saw the silhouette of an old man, barely able to stand on his feet and shaking with too much energy. The head of the family stood like a ghost, his body gaunt in an instant, all his clothes torn and hanging in rags. Looking at his arm, the old man was horrified to see that all the muscles there had been destroyed and he couldn't even move. Sayu Boy appeared next to him and stood over his opponent, saying that he might not even try. If he wants to last even a little longer, let him stop. Sayu looked at him with eyes full of calmness. As expected, the old man wasn't going to give up. He clenched his entire body and tried to get to his feet. At least somehow energy spread around him. But as soon as the poor man tried to turn his arm at least, all his muscles were instantly twisted by a cramp. Looking at the old man squirming in pain, Sayu folded his arms across his chest and bowed his head. It was all useless. The boy frowned. This man can no longer control his body. All the organs would just explode in such a case. The old master already knew something was wrong with him. The man stretched out his arm to at least reach his opponent. A whistling sound was heard at the last moment. Sayu jumped up and dodged the two blades flying at him from behind. It was also useless. The guy only sighed. Now the old man's skills were just useless. But he saw a single blade separate the old man's sore arm from his body with great speed. Now it all made sense. The boy looked closer. He decided to remove his hand to control the lightning streams. What an unexpected twist. Sayu didn't think the old man would come up with something like this. With his remaining hand, the old master summoned a bundle from the fire to burn everything here, along with this insolent fellow. 2 walls of fire flew past the guy, which he safely dodged without much trouble. One of the fighters covered his face so as not to get burned. The temperature was rising rapidly. 2 fighters who were busy with each other were in shock. In this place, a real fire was growing that risked to burn everything around. And here was our hero standing there watching the old man concentrate his energy if he possessed such power. That's where it should have started. What kind of games were these? The old master became even more enraged, his brain no longer working at all. He wanted to destroy everyone in his path. However, Sayu realized that the internal energy could destroy this old man from within. He was unable to control it. The guy wasn't going to let go of his opponent, so quickly he charged his hand with his lightning and prepared to strike. Smiling, he said that he would make Master Dawn experience the infernal torment before he went to the other world. A heavenly weapon appeared on the light. Sayu put his 2 hands forward and prepared his most powerful strike. The huge fireball began to disintegrate under the pressure of the monstrous lightning, creating an explosion. The blow was so strong that the 2 experienced fighters could barely keep their feet under the pressure of the air. Man closed his eyes so as not to be blinded. His body was no longer obeying him, but he had to save his life. In the end, everything dissipated. Dawn stood in his place and understood nothing. It was simply impossible how this guy managed to repel the attack. Who was he anyway? Sayu stood in front of the old man and looked at him with his piercing blue gaze, his eyes glowing like 2 lanterns. In the end, the whole temple was destroyed along with the cave, leaving only charred debris in its place after the fire. Master Dawn was furious. His plan that he had nurtured all his life had failed thanks to some kid. It's just impossible. Seeing this monster approaching him, the old man fell to the ground and began to crawl away with quick movements. He shrank back and became much smaller as Sayu came closer and closer to him, his eyes burning with rage and anger. Lightning crackled around the guy. His entire body was covered in energy, to the point where he was like a bundle of thunderbolts. The old man started screaming and calling for help, but no one came to him. He poked his opponent with his hand and begged him not to come any closer. He really wanted to live more than anything. Looking at it all from the outside, Gun couldn't believe that everything was ruined, all of his father's endeavors that he had spent decades building. But the man missed the moment, and an opponent appeared behind his back. Chul's burning eyes appeared literally out of nowhere. It only took 1 blow for Gun to fall to the ground. Clutching his face, the man was defeated. Xiao Wu saw some sort of swing. He was still standing in his place and waited for a counterpunch. This battle would have to be postponed for later for Gong. Now it was dangerous. He might not survive. In the end, the unfortunate Chul received a powerful blow. Right in the stomach. All of his internal organs seemed to switch places. Sayu stood where he was and suddenly noticed another blast wave approaching him. He bounced back and launched a bundle of lightning straight at his opponent. Meanwhile, the head of the Moyong family was on his last legs and wanted to leave. The eldest son approached the old man and, taking his lifeless body in his arms, began to run away. For some reason, Sayu stood still and didn't do anything. He didn't try to chase anyone, but just watched his opponent. In a calm voice, the boy asked, Did they really think it was possible to escape from him? Putting his hand forward, the boy said he would take their lives sooner or later. From his hand broke out the vortex. I began to follow the two, fleeing at an incredible speed. At the same time, Old Man Hong was fighting the two twins. One of them was already heading towards him with a powerful punch. Swinging the whip, the old man tried to strike the rope, entangled his entire arm, and headed forward. At the same time, one of the twins approached him, swinging his blade. Making at the gate, the old man swung two legs and kicked both at once, pushing his opponents back. One of the twins found himself bound with a whip. The old man had only to pull close and strike, which he did, and his opponent flew backwards, unable to control his body. The older brother was only breathing heavily. He couldn't even move a finger. The old man was much stronger than expected. Not only now did these two realize who stood in front of them, Great Master Hong coping with this old man would be extremely difficult. The old drunkard looked at these two and smirked, and its two top fighters from the Moyong family, somehow not particularly impressive. When they saw the huge rock begin to collapse, the people looked up and were horrified to see that they were about to be swept away. Gun flew past them and shouted to the two twins to retreat immediately. They would not draw out this fight. Sayu only watched from the side with a blank stare. The guy didn't seem to take them seriously at all. The younger sister shrieked for them to leave immediately. She had never seen such power before. Need to leave this place. Turning to her brother, she shouted that she had to hurry, but the man said he wouldn't go. Even if he has to give his life, he just has to deal with this old poor man. Her sister looked at him, and a shiver ran down her spine as she realized there was no way to persuade him. Leaping closer, Sayu caught up to Quan and knocked the weapon out of his hands with one powerful punch. The sister saw that something unimaginable was happening to her brother. He would not be able to withstand such a blow. Lifting the man, who was barely breathing in her arms, her sister looked at him with a disconsolate look. Hearing someone approaching from behind, the girl turned and asked why they were interfering in the family's affairs. Standing behind was Sayu. "What do you mean?" Interfering guy was surprised it wasn't him who was constantly interfering and putting sticks in his wheels. But it was a lie. The girl kept screaming. He took all the money that belonged to them. What more does he want? The fact that Sayu had been following the two caravans heading to Moyong all this time, the guy got even closer. Hearing that he was looking for the same child, one of the captives listened. He remembered the man. Suddenly, a huge fireball started falling from the sky. Everyone else turned around and squinted. The sister saw this and shouted that a great calamity was coming. They must leave immediately. Everything around him began to explode. The old drunkard looked around him with horror. A real catastrophe was beginning. Turning around and looking at her opponent, Ji said that this place will become his grave. He messed up absolutely everything. Sayu just stared at her and didn't say anything. He didn't care what those two did. He would destroy them anyway. Explosions continued to rumble everywhere. The rock was crumbling, dropping tons of rocks on the people. It had been over 2 weeks since that explosion. The silhouette of a man sat in his temple and pondered. He wouldn't even be sad that his only son had gone to the other side of the world. He didn't care. The head of the family held onto his hand, or rather, the place where it had once been, and pondered about that young man. This man seemed to be acting against all logic, and nothing was known about him. The old man wondered who this man was, and how he knew such a martial art that was unlike anything they had dealt with before. To his horror, the old man noticed that Sayu had snuck into his chambers and was standing right in front of him, preparing to attack. At the time when everything was falling apart, Sayu and the old man left the drunkard wondering how it was even possible. In addition, the captive also managed to survive. The guy helped everyone, and they safely left the place. Sayu Saeed, the girl he's looking for, disappeared somewhere around here. Then she was about 6 years old. The old man sitting next to him said that he had been locked in here for decades. Then they brought men, women, all indiscriminately. There's a book of slave records. Surely in that book there's the name of that girl, only she's in Moyong. Sayu turned around and headed away from the place, only saying that maybe it would turn out to be a fluke after all. Now he came to the room of the head of the Moyong family and destroyed the old man forever with one precise blow. Meanwhile, the younger sister, along with Gun, came to her father's house and did not yet suspect what had happened. They had something to tell. The room was silent. A silhouette sat on the throne and gave no sign of life. Seeing his father in such a state, all the family members were horrified. Someone had snuck in here and destroyed him. In the meantime, Sayu snuck out of the temple unnoticed by anyone and headed out on his own. The guy only turned around and heard a scream from one of the family members but didn't pay attention. Sai still managed to get a list of slaves in the guy's hands. Was a small tablet with inscriptions on it. Back home, the first thing Sayu saw was an old drunk man who was again singing alcohol by the light of the moon. Smiling, the old man said that Don seemed like a hero to everyone, but now turned out to be universally evil. Can we drink to his repose? But even so, the guy refused. He's not that sensitive and won't drink for anyone, so it's a lost cause. Without paying attention to it, the old man sucked on the bottle again and began to follow the guy walking around the room with his eyes. After a short pause, Hong said that he had something that might help find that girl. But the guy actually had a request for him. The old man turned and stared at him questioningly. It was about the black traders, actually. It's hard to call them anything. They're usually called the trades union. Realizing that there was nothing good to learn about them, Sayu's situation was getting more complicated. It was like that. The old man only grinned. Doesn't the guy know who is in front of him? Hong can still find out something? But without payment, he said, as usual, refused the old man. Only smirked and looked at the kid. In the boy's hands was a small blue crystal, glistening in the light of the moon. This should be enough. Without thinking long, the old man held out his hands. Surely he would take this as payment. It's shining marble. In a trembling voice, the alcoholic kept saying he needed something else. He was so excited, the guy was even surprised. The drunkard began to tell a few years ago he saw a bronze dragon being destroyed by a single martial art. Then the notion of power flipped. The old man sat beside a piece of iron, once a dragon. Many years ago, an old man was sitting near a piece of bronze as usual and suddenly heard someone's voice. A caravan was passing under his feet somewhere down below. They were heading for Shenyang and were oriented by these statues. It was then that the old man saw Sayu sitting on one of the carts, but he didn't know who it was. That's not what I'm talking about. He saw the same boy he's been traveling with for days. The boy lowered his head in thought. It had been so long ago that this old man seemed to know the master quite well. After giving her just a few large and noisy sips of alcohol, the old man said that this information should be kept. His smile stretched across his entire face. If the boy agrees, then why don't they help each other? They will be equal in the end. There was really no other option. Sayu folded his arms and promised to tell everything he knew. The old man did the same, and he made a pure-hearted promise that he would get any information he could about anyone or anything. Sayu smiled inwardly and was a little relieved that he had found someone in this world to help him. That was the end of it, and they decided, so I stood for a few more minutes, bowing to each other. The next day, the two immediately went to the next destination. Sayu, where are you in a hurry? He walked at a fast pace, and the old man did not keep up. Finally, Master Hong decided to give the boy some information. He took out a small book with a shabby cover. It was information about Kang Ho. The kid looked at the strange notebook and picked it up. This knowledge would help him a lot. The next road, Sayu stubbornly started to read every line. It spoke of two great warriors. Saint Rainblade and Saint Palm Guy had heard something about them a long time ago. The first was Saint Huanbo Gong, Ak, a man with long red hair, more like a monkey. The second saint, he is the head of the unions of the ancient bases, as well as the union of the five dragons, Yun Yopyai. The old man said that these two are considered the strongest, but he wasn't completely sure. There are still many masters, but who knows? The three splendors consist of three steel blades of the strongest warriors in history, and the three buds are the three girls, Blood Plum Bud, Lotus Bud, and Ice Flower Bud. The old man went on to say that the man they had met was one of the strongest tyrants of the Lone Blade. He is the strongest of the three saints and stands at the head, and Da Ryok village is under their direct command. The noble warrior Cheol Murin is the son of the tyrant of the Single Blade. Say it is in his hands that the future of the entire continent lies. The two friends moved through the gorge at a brisk pace without even noticing anything around them. The old man wouldn't let go of his bottle of liquor for a second, and it seemed to be all he fed on. He exhaled heavily and said that he just loved liquor, the best drink possible. Sayu continued reading. There was something written here about masters. Hearing the questions of whether there was someone stronger than the saints, the old man almost choked up. Well, there must have been one person. If rumors are to be believed, this man from the northern Yuan is dubbed the Lord of Heaven. He must be stronger than all the others. No one knows what his power is. Some say it's just a rumor, but who knows? Hong held out a bottle of alcohol and said that he now doubted that there was anyone stronger than this kid. Thinking about this man, Sayu speculated that perhaps he was the one who had taken his girlfriend. They probably would have talked like that if the two of them hadn't been distracted by someone's voice shouting behind them that they were about to lose their minds. Looking at his hand, Sayu said that the technique he wielded was created many years ago. He originally even found it difficult to eat. Listening to the old man wondered if the heavenly weapons were practically the same as street fights, but that wasn't an explanation. Putting his hand forward, the guy said that his power acted on inanimate objects. His hand immediately began to be covered with electricity. Seeing such a burst of energy, the old man almost choked on his alcohol and stared at his ward. There was a monstrous rumble. A huge wave of energy shattered the huge rock almost in a second, turning it into a pile of rocks. A rush of wind threw the old man off, and he dropped his glass of alcohol and flew somewhere far away. In all his life, the average drunkard had never seen anything like this. He couldn't believe that someone had such power. Looking back, Hong saw that the liquor had almost completely drained out. The drunkard immediately started shouting the young gentleman that he had purposely done this. He knocked over his glass to destroy the drink. The action moved to the village of Da Ryok, where a huge temple stood on a massive foundation. Sitting somewhere in his garden, man reasoned Master Dawn had suffered a heart attack, but the man didn't really believe it. His interlocutor, a middle-aged man, said that this is a complete nonsense. Their master was sent to the world by the same guy. The master himself realized that something had happened between the two, and the boy had attacked first. The interlocutor said that even if this guy got caught, he would deny everything. It seems that in the village, it would not be possible to earn his favor. Sayu himself was watching this conversation, and he really didn't want to be used as an ordinary weapon to achieve his goals. The Lion Union member kept his seat and said he had only good news to look forward to and walked away. The man's easy stride down the stairs downstairs, the conversation was over, and he left with a heavy. The experienced warrior pondered Sayu would become his first enemy, the male TV ears sure of it. A lot of good warriors have fallen at the hands of this kid. How strong he is. The man in the broad hat walked past the others without paying attention to them. He thought he could hope for at least a squad of swordsmen. The man walked into a room more like a bar. There were already a few people gathered in a bunch. The fighter came closer and bowed to greet the master, his voice low and frightened. Suddenly, the master put out his hand, then over his apprentice in surprise. The merchant union master, named Chong, pointed his finger at the sign of silence and hissed. The man listened to the people at a neighboring table talk about how the heroes of the Moyoung family had confronted the intruders. From the mouth of one of the men, he heard the name of the sage Hong of the Gaibun. His interlocutor, who had been deprived of a leg, sat across from him and spoke in horror about this man, his whole body trembling with surprise. This man had the hands of a true demon. Naturally, it was Saya, who was the one who had taken away this man's leg with a single blow. There were several powerful explosions, and then the elite fighter lost his leg in almost an instant. The expression on that man's face was completely calm and devoid of any emotion. The man said he looked like a king who had just won a hard-fought battle. The head of the tradesmen's union asked his ward, "Isn't it interesting?" But the man replied that it's just awful. There was a distinct mask of horror on his face, and no matter how much he listened, goosebumps ran down his spine. Hearing that he needed to contact the Gaibun, the man bowed and promised to follow orders. And Zhang also wondered what Master Dong suffered from. He didn't care about that story. The servant replied that in the village, they say he's been sent to the other world, but who is unknown. Taking a small glass of the drink, the man frowned, wondering what happened between the king and the head of the family. Meanwhile, Sayu was indignant. He said he had to take the horses, but he was sure it was a long way to go. Old man Hong was somewhere lurching behind him for a very long time, whether he would be able to walk for a few days. Eventually, these two arrived in Taiwan in one of the provinces. The city was indeed a huge, peculiar trading center. The guy, along with the old man, came here to observe. Here they were already sitting at one of the tables and looking at everything. While Sayu was sitting here, he was looking around and thinking about the Great Celestial Merchant Alliance. Sounded interesting at the very least. The old man had been eating something all this time. It was noodles with some kind of meat. When he was asked why Hong called Sayu the god of battle, he choked. The two men were distracted from their conversation by someone's shouting. The man shouted for them to immediately kneel down in front of him, for it was the Lord in front of them. Looking closer, Sayu saw a strange man with an elongated, sharp face and a predatory look. The guy immediately felt bloodlust from this man. He apparently was extremely dangerous. Seeing this man, the old man bit his tongue and did not expect to see the son of the head of the Crane Creek walls. The man's name was Khan, and he came for revenge, not to take advantage of his family's situation. Several fighters, armed with long blades, did not understand what this madman was saying. They wanted to rush into battle, but were stopped by someone's voice, and the men immediately turned around. In front of them stood a fat man. His name was Mu Yik. This was the son of the head of Crane Creek. Long Kong wasn't going to talk for long. He immediately pulled out his huge blade and continued his attack. Recognizing who stood before them, the fighters froze. It was the Demon Blade, a dangerous opponent. The sword of one of the fighters shattered into pieces after one powerful blow before the man could even realize it. Meanwhile, Kang was destroying the fighters one by one with powerful swinging punches. The fat man was completely lost and did not know what to do. He was very scared because it was life-threatening. Watching all this, the old drunk just watched. He wasn't going to interfere. This fatty deserves to be executed. So, no surprise. Sayu only glanced indifferently over there. Means this person is powerful, let them sort it out themselves. While the two were discreetly watching from the side, Kang continued the offensive, his face stretched out even more, and his eyes made with madness. The fighters flew up one by one. They were sent to the other side. Instantly, the enemy was beyond their strength. When the old drunkard saw that his opponent was flying towards him, he began to strike. Despite his physique, he was extremely fast. Putting his hand forward, Hong blocked the powerful punch. With a single movement, the old man's eyes instantly changed. With just one blow, he pushed his opponent far to the side, and Kang flew a few meters away without even realizing what had happened. The man became furious, his face contorted, his mind foggy, and there was only one phrase in his head: destroy the demon. Realizing that there was no way to change this madman's mind, the old man prepared to fight, and a huge blade at high speed was already flying at him. It only took one blow for the drunkard to smash the weapon to splinters with his foot alone. Grasping the blade, Kang continued to growl. He rushed forward. This man's head was no longer thinking. The old man didn't seem to realize what he'd just done, but he moved forward with a light gait. At the last moment, Hong saw a small thread that was right in front of his nose. The thread tinkled like a bee. Looking at him with a crazed look, Kang smirked and said that he had finally caught him. The old man's entire body was suddenly entangled in a strange thread. The poor man felt pressure all over his skin and couldn't move. Taking advantage of his opponent's helplessness, Kang ran forward like a raging bull. Noticing that the battle was not to be avoided, they decided to intervene. Sayu began to twirl 2 rice sticks on his fingers and prepared to strike. He swung his 2 wands straight at his opponent, and they whistled forward, slicing through the air. At the last moment, Kang bounced to the side and realized nothing. The thread had loosened, and the man began to twirl his head in different directions. Once free, the old man exhaled a silver thread. Turns out, and this guy is not so simple. Seeing the one who attacked him so meanly, Kang shouted for the guy to come out immediately and fight like an honest warrior. But in the same second, the fighter felt someone's soft hands on his shoulder. Sayu asked, "Is it fair to use an assisted weapon?" The answer came with itself. Khan swung his blade and aimed directly at his opponent's neck. The guy saw it all. With a deft twist to the side, he kicked his opponent right in the jaw, and a crunch was heard. After such a blow, the unfortunate man flew a few meters and crashed to the ground with a loud thud. What followed was a tackle. Sayu grabbed his arm and lashed out so that Kang cried out in pain. As the bandit flew back, he saw that his own blade was already coming at him, blade first. Bowing his head, Sayu only looked at him. There was no point in continuing all this. He was already finished. While his comrade was dealing with the impudent old man, was looking at the silver thread with which he was to be bound. Feeling the incredible blow, barely breathing, he lay on the floor and looked before him with a devastated look. Not wanting to let his opponent go so quickly, Sayu approached him a few paces away and swung his arm. Suddenly they were interrupted by the scream of an old drunkard. He was shouting for the god of battle to let him live. When the old man saw what was happening, he turned cold, and now they wouldn't be able to escape from this place. Everything was destroyed. However, Sayu didn't hurt anything. Kang looked at his opponent's hand frozen near his face. The boy finally recognized the old man's right, but he had to confess to the local authorities because they had made a big mess here. Meanwhile, another man armed with a bow was following them, standing on a dais and watching the town. The man drew his arrow and prepared to shoot. When it comes to taking a life, you have to do everything quickly and quietly. Unsuspecting Sayu suddenly heard some whistling behind his back, but still didn't turn around. The stealthy assassin applied a mental link. He revealed an eye glowing yellow and merged with his arrow. Turning back, Sayu looked at his enemy and asked him if he was sure of what he was doing. There was a monstrous energy coming from the guy, spilling out like an ocean, filling everything around him. Feeling such a wave of energy, the man could barely stand on his feet and leaned backward. The wind was simply monstrous. What a shame to have to retreat after all. A man can never feel how strong this man is. Seeing the scale of the destruction, the old man began to turn his head. What a devastation it is here. At least something interesting can be repaired. Wondering where his opponents had gone, Sayu looked around with a keen eye. He said it was all right, not to worry. Once out of the city, the old man began to look around. Taiwan looked just fine, but there was no time to waste a minute now. Watching the old man going to cook some soup, Sayu only sighed. This man does not change. On the way, the old man kept thinking about the silver thread that black merchants usually used. The guy said that following him was not such a good idea. His comrade could easily cause a lot of problems. The old man wondered if Sayu's friend meant that the man wasn't the only one, there was someone else. As it was, some man with a bow was constantly watching them from afar. It would be problematic if he interfered. But it seems the drunk didn't care because the Battle King will save him anyway. Sayu asked him not to call him that. It annoys him. The old man put his hand behind his head and headed for the exit, the young man following him. Getting closer, Sayu was surprised the sign was empty with no writing on it. Entering the temple. Sayu continued to rant. He was expecting something more. After all, it is a Gaibin. There was some statue waiting for them. Seeing his friend standing on the doorstep, the drunkard offered to come in. Let him come in. Seeing that a secret door had opened in front of him, the guy was a little surprised here, and such things have. As soon as the travelers walked inside, they were immediately met by several dozen people who immediately greeted the elder. Drums sounded, and the temple was filled to the brim with at least several hundred people. The sage smirked, apparently pleased that they had not seen each other for a long time. Soon, the guys went to the archive. Thanks to this, they can find a lot of information, so also about the ambassador from Yuan. Sitting down on the chair, Hong asked if they had managed to find out anything about the Black Merchant branch. The head of the Gaibin branch replied that his head's name is Yom, and he became the head also because of his outstanding abilities. After thinking carefully, Sayu said that there is no problem, he can easily handle it. Besides, there is a plan. Frankly speaking, the old man doubted with this young man's temperament anything could be expected. The head of the archives said that the same Kang, who started the battle right in the city, is now in custody and waiting for a decision. Hearing this name, the old man hissed. Could it be that this is the same underworld demon blade and he is now in court? Yes, there was a man sitting behind a sturdy grate and muttering to himself only one phrase to destroy the demon. He looked more like a madman. Suddenly his body began to deform. His muscles grew several times their size. The guards passing by heard some strange sound from the cell and immediately turned their heads there. While in the cell, the criminal continued to deform himself. He no longer looked like a normal person. Suddenly the bars flew out with the root turning to dust. The criminal broke free without much trouble. The guards looked on in horror as the prisoner turned into a true monster and glared at his new victims. The man's eyes were glowing with bright fire, and he had a smile on his face like a real madman, shouting that demons had gathered here. Meanwhile, being in his seat, the old man pondered many who knew this man, but there was something wrong here. Under the powerful blow, one of the guards flew into the floor and nearly lost consciousness. Out of the cell, Kang kept saying that he needed to destroy the demon. The man had completely lost his mind. As he stepped outside, the criminal looked around. His face changed, but it was still as predatory as the beasts. Outside, already waiting for him, was a fellow marvelous steel archer. But what is he doing here? The man had already managed to slay all the guards. He turned to Khan and asked if he had a choice to see his friend. Grasping his blade, Kang flashed his eyes and headed forward. His friend had already disappeared somewhere. Yong, the archer's name, had already disappeared into the distance and returned the weapon to his friend, who had unfinished business. Meanwhile, Fatty Hua was furious, saying he almost went to the other world because of some crazy guy. He stood in the room of his father, the head of the union. The man was as fat as his son. He said the criminal was already in custody. The old man realized that his son had never admitted his mistakes, and it was mostly because of him. Hua knew his character and knew he was guilty, but he didn't want to admit it. Father Young only sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair. He didn't want to talk about it anymore. Without listening to his father's admonition, the misguided son came to his army and raised his hand, shouting for revenge. He was going to restore the honor and influence of his clan, no matter what it cost him. The man led an entire army behind him. Once Fatty opened the door, the first thing he saw was the silhouette of a monstrous man several meters tall. Khan came to get even. The man wasn't going to leave things the way they were with a crazy smile on his face. The fat man didn't understand how this was possible, but it was too late. One blow, and his body shattered into two pieces. The powerful explosion threw the rest of the warriors far back. The first to suffer was the head's son. As soon as the old man heard the rumble, he realized what was wrong. He was worried about his son and became furious. Shang drew his blade and moved forward. He had to avenge his son's life. Breaking down the doors, the man moved forward towards the stranger who had taken the life of his only son and heir. However, this was just what Kang wanted. He should have done something about it a long time ago and destroyed this family. Pushing off with one foot, the master jumped up and flew straight at the criminal waving his blade. They clashed in a monstrous battle. The old man was as strong as the monster. After receiving a powerful rebuff, Zhang flew aside and grabbed the ground with his hand. Looking at him, Kang only laughed. He thought they were all trash, which ended up being true. The old man grimaced. His face began to warp with rage at how this tosser has such a way of speaking. There was no point in talking to him anymore. The man armed himself with a blade, moved forward at breakneck speed. He would avenge his son. Applying the hovering blade technique, by putting two fingers forward, he prepared to strike the rogue. This blow was nothing to Kanu. The man easily deflected it with his powerful blade. In the very center of the square, a monstrous battle broke out. Zhang bounced to the side of his. The opponent was several times larger than the old man himself. Everyone present was horrified. It was simply impossible. This monster blocked the soaring blades. Goosebumps ran down the old man's back, and he couldn't believe what he was seeing. This monster is so strong. As expected, the head of the family was not going to give up. He put his blade forward and headed forward. Seeing such a powerful blow, Kang was even a little surprised, and that was not a bad thing. The man had a semblance of a smile on his face. Soaring into the air like a bird, the old man shouted that he must take his heart by all means. Getting into a fighting stance, Kang prepared himself. If this was all the old man was capable of, it was pathetic. Smiling broadly, the man roared that he would destroy even any memory of this man. Swinging his blade, he launched a powerful sound wave that threw the old man backwards. Everyone else around them was horrified, and the head of their family was split in half and flew away. There was a huge explosion in the city. The ground shook, and all the people in the area began to wake up. Meanwhile, a nice flavorful soup was on the fire and was almost ready. Sayu, looking at the dish, asked what kind of food it was. The old man only glanced at him. Smiling, the drunkard said that it is a special dish to be eaten when one joins the Gaiban. The guy grimaced a little, but he didn't really want to eat some obscure concoction from an alcoholic old man. At this time, a servant came to the head and whispered something in his ear. As the man listened, his face changed. The old man also saw the worry on the head's face and asked what was going on here, but the servant bowed and left. In a trembling voice, the head replied that Kang had attacked the Crane Creek clan and made a mess of things there. Seiyu looked at him and squinted again. This type, what is he not available? He should be in jail right now. But no Kan was alive and well and had already dealt with the head of the clan and now stood wondering where to go next. He stood on a small balcony and watched the people who were apparently playing in some sort of casino. An employee suddenly approached the man and asked him to follow him. Khan asked where he was, and the employee said he was waiting outside. With a quick step, they went to the nearest door. The employee walked ahead. Opening the door, the two entered the room, which so far at first glance was empty. The soft hand of the attendant rested on the head of one of the bronze dragons and twirled something there. Suddenly, a secret door in the wall opened. A man stretched his arm forward and offered to step inside. Inside, Kana was already waiting for a man's silhouette, sat us in a big chair, folding his hands in front of him. Not a bad place here. The man looked around. He had no idea there could be a secret room. In front of him sat the head of the Black Traders. Yom folded his arms in front of him and grinned. He said he needed help. Hearing the offer, Kang immediately refused. It was complete nonsense. The man snapped his fingers and walked out. The head continued speaking. Apparently their target is a father and daughter who arrived here 10 years ago. When Kang heard what was going on, he was angry and furious at how dare they behave like that. Yom Zakin said that it was somehow unfair that the Union had turned its back on Black Traders and that something had to be done about it. Upon hearing that an outsider had invaded their territory, Kang became furious and nearly burst with anger. He's turned back into some kind of monster everyone who lives outside the continent. This truly evil man has taken up his cause again. When the conversation ended, he turned around and walked away. Soon Kang would make the great heavenly merchant alliance disappear forever. The smiling Yom only looked at him afterwards. that was another matter, and he liked it better. An archer appeared behind him. He marveled at how quickly he was able to get this man to act. The man was even horrified by such determination by the way everything is going according to plan, right? Looking at him, the head of the black merchants smiled just like he wanted to talk about. Let's go to the Blood Tears clan. Archer squinted and looked even more closely. He was wary the whole time. A few drops of drink fell into the mug with a loud sound, came from someone's satisfied voice. Still, Sayu agreed to drink some liquor looking at the moon, and drinking alcohol has something to it. This idea was interrupted by someone's scream. One of the men was wondering if the Crane Scream clan had already been destroyed. The chapter was very frightened. All the followers were destroyed. After hearing the details, Hong was horrified by such monstrous atrocities only a monster could commit, and why so? The elder ordered the head to choose 3 or 4 people and follow this monster, let them not miss a single detail. After thinking about it, the young man suggested not to get involved without a good plan, because it would be worse for them. Suddenly, 3 people entered the room. In front of them was a girl in a red dress, followed by 2 loyal servants. Seeing that the place was full, the 3 of them thought of leaving, because all the tables were surrounded by other people. But suddenly, the girl shifted her gaze somewhere to the side and tensed. Her eyes slid past. She looked at Sayu. The boy was eating and drinking alcohol with a strange aura emanating from him. She came a few steps closer and asked if she could sit next to me. As you can see, there are no tables available. Without too much objection, Sayu agreed anyway. This table is too big for him. Looking at him with an expressionless look, the woman thanked him. After placing the order, all 3 sat down next to each other and unlocked the table. The waiters started circling around the customers. The girl decided to be the first to introduce herself. Her name was Song. She immediately apologized for her ignorance. One of the servants introduced himself and gave his name. His name was Yong. The man was very wary and kept his eyes on the others. Another servant also gave his name. All of them were followers of the manhwa sect. This person had a graceful mustache. Folding his hands in front of him, the guy also introduced himself, giving his name without much enthusiasm. One of the servants assumed that the person sitting in front of him was a martial arts master, so where did he come from? Pouring himself another round of alcohol, the guy said he wasn't a member of any sect. Song continued to watch him with an unbroken gaze. The girl felt that he had incredible stamina. It was getting late, and Sayu decided to bow out. He got up from the table and wanted to walk away from here. With a good-natured smile, the guy said he was glad to see them today and left. One of the servants looked after the guy as he walked up the stairs. He seems to be a normal person. However, Song wasn't too worried about the world being big, so there are many different events and people there. But even so, the servant said to be vigilant and look out for each person who knows what they have in mind. However, there was no energy coming from this man at all. He was completely different from the others. Then the servant suggested that perhaps Kang planned the crime himself, no matter how strong he is. The girl herself wasn't sure about it, yet it was worth pondering. The Demon Blade was a very dangerous opponent. The next morning, Sayu walked out of the hotel and looked around. The weather outside was beautiful, with fresh air blowing in his face. At this time, Song was already watching him. She had seen this person yesterday, but they never got to talk to each other. The girl had a blade in her hands. She wasn't interested in the guy himself, but she did care about his presence here and what he was doing. And where he was going so early, the girl looked even more closely. Something in this man made her suspicious. Outside the door stood a servant. He wanted to go inside and asked the young mistress's permission. The man opened the door and saw nothing there. The room was empty, and only the curtains wobbled on the window. The older sister had gone somewhere. The 2 men stood staring at the empty room, unable to understand what had happened. And now Mad Kang sat in his room and kept saying only one phrase, destroy the demon. The man was obsessed with this idea. He considered absolutely all people as demons to be exterminated. They were not worthy to live in this world. Clutching his sword, he set out to destroy the Grand Alliance of Merchants. The Demon Blade will destroy the foreigners. Meanwhile, in the tradesman's building, a man sat at a desk and sorted through the last of the papers. Chong rejoiced. Taiwan is simply made to make money. On the man's face was a joyful smile. The manager sat opposite him and wrote something. He nodded his head understandingly because he thought so too. The head ordered an immediate focus and redirected the money to repair the fortress. He had a very important dinner ahead of him, and he needed to feed his dear guest properly for a good conversation. Putting his hand on the book on the table, the manager promised that he would make sure of everything himself. Folding his hands in front of him, the man said he would then proceed immediately. The manager gave the go-ahead. Lastly, the head asked his ward if he had heard that Meng Hui had returned to this city. A moment later, Hui was already standing before his host, demanding to know about the Gaibin and his unexpected actions. The man reported that so far everything was calm and there was nothing to worry about, but there was obvious fear on his face. However, the head was sure that there were a lot of merchant guilds in Taiwan and they all only see the obstacle. He was especially concerned about the Black Merchants Union with its head a very slippery type, who did not shy away from dirty tricks. And besides, Hui said that the demon blade had suddenly awakened and was connected to this alliance. No sooner had this man arrived in the new city than he had already made a ruckus and created a real mess in the Crane clan. Everyone had already heard about how he destroyed their master with just one blow. It had spread all over Taiwan. Worse, all the followers were destroyed. This man is a true demon who knows no mercy. Then Khan was very pleased he had destroyed the first obstacle in his path and now stood on the ruins of that carnage. Hui didn't know why he came to Taiwan yet, but if he's connected to the black traders, these people will show themselves soon. In the end, Zhang said they're definitely up to something, but it's still unclear what. These two will be very dangerous adversaries to keep an eye on or else it's all over. Sighing heavily, Chan skipped his head. If the young mistress was around them right now, she would have figured them out in a flash. At that time, a messenger ran to the building where the head was sitting. He was breathing heavily and had urgent news. A man burst into the house and shouted that the young mistress was sending a letter. Everyone immediately turned on him. The head opened the letter, and as he counted, a smile spread across his face. As usual, mistress writes at the most opportune moment. But seeing how the gentleman's face changed, all the others fell silent and looked at him with frightened eyes. Hui asked in a trembling voice, "Isn't there something wrong?" There was clear fear on the man's face. The head got up from his seat and went to the window and said that there might be difficulties in the negotiations. They put up too high demands. Meanwhile, the young mistress stood on her balcony at her estate and watched city life from above. A servant came up behind her and bowed to the young mistress and asked what was wrong. A man from the Union of Five Dragons was sent, and the girl turned around and said she was ready to receive him. While Sayu was walking through the city and not noticing anything, he was already being followed. Song was standing somewhere on top of one of the buildings. Don't tell me he's exploring the city. The guy just walked the streets and turned his head in different directions like a tourist. Turning around, Sayu immediately noticed the following guy shot his eyes somewhere to the side and started looking around. He had long ago noticed that he was being watched, but he didn't let on that it was a good game to play together. When Song saw that she had been declassified, she immediately disappeared to somewhere far away and was already standing behind one of the walls, breathing heavily. There's no way she hid her aura perfectly, but how could this man figure her out so quickly? While the young man was exploring the city, he had already met with Khan. This meeting was quite unexpected right in the center. Looking at his old acquaintance, Kang was surprised. He didn't think he could meet him here in the middle of the day. Now Sayu himself saw his opponent. The guy tensed up and moved his eyes to the side, not wanting to get into a fight right now. But the guy wasn't going to get away that easily. They had unfinished business on the way. People started gathering. The girl hid behind one of the walls and watched from above. She couldn't believe that these two were chatting so easily in the middle of the street, out in the middle of nowhere, like they knew each other before. Putting a mask over her face, the girl prepared to watch further. Can these two are connected? Meanwhile, the conversation between them continued. Sayu had already heard that Kang had participated in the court-martial and was in jail. The criminal looked at him with a predatory gaze. These people would never be able to hold him back. Did the guy already know something about him? Looking at him spitefully, Sayu smirked strangely. It would be strange not to know about this man after what he had done. The criminal immediately recognized Sayu's eye color and accent as different, so he wasn't from around here after all. And so he began to utter his phrase, "Destroy the demon again." The man grabbed his blade and prepared to attack. But suddenly a song girl appeared between them. She put out her blade and blocked the guy's path. The old acquaintance greeted the master again, displaying her blade and preparing to fight. Sayu still didn't know what she was talking about. For some reason, the woman was sure the two were connected. It's too weird. The guy looked at her, and she seemed to have misunderstood, but it had to be explained. Why the girl turned to the criminal and greeted him a long time ago. They certainly haven't seen each other, much less here in Taiwan. Hiding his blade, the criminal softened a bit. Here's a surprise bloody plum right here. But the girl wasn't going to gossip here. Did walking around the city mean exterminating innocent people? It seems that everything about him is already well known, so Kang cannot hide. The criminal again took up his sword and began to growl something about the demon. No matter who stood in his way, he would have to destroy them all. Armed with his blade, Kang ran forward. All this time, Sayu stood somewhere aside and watched. And this man is stronger than expected to cause a massacre here again. As expected, Song wasn't going to just stand by. She grasped her blade and deliberately passed this test. Looking at these two, Sayu pondered, Bloodplum Bud, she is the first woman to become a prominent cult follower. Hearing the screams behind him, the guy turned around and people started to recognize the perpetrator of the massacre. Gradually, the street filled with people watching the fight that was about to begin. Turning around at the other people, Sayu was upset. Already many gawkers had gathered. At this rate, people might get hurt. Two servants are wandering around the city in search of their mistress. They are early to go, where she has been missing since morning. Looking closer, one of the men saw a crowd somewhere in the distance. People were looking at something. Meanwhile, the demon blade had already prepared to attack the fragile girl stood against it. As soon as the two followers saw that their mistress was in danger, they immediately rushed to help. In a flash, the two fighters jumped over the dozens of people and headed straight for the attackers. But the battle was unstoppable. Kang attacked the young mistress and swung his blade to strike her. Suddenly, Sayu's soft hand grasped the girl's and stopped her blade. The guy stood between two fires and tried to prevent the battle because there could be a lot of people hurt here. After such dedication, the girl was horrified the master got between them. What was the matter? The criminal trembled with rage. Someone stood in his way. It is simply unthinkable. He must destroy everyone. In a completely calm voice, Kang ordered the two to stop immediately. It was not the time or place to fight now. Looking at Song, the guy said that she is called the strongest girl master, but she so easily gives in to provocation. Seeing that the criminal wasn't going to just back down, Sayu began to concentrate. His energy arguing with him meant putting his life on the line. Feeling the incredible energy in his entire body, Kang screamed with rage and pain. His eyes began to glow like two searchlights. The man didn't immediately realize what had happened and just whirled his head around like a madman. Sayu stood in front of your fighters and realized he made a mistake. He thought he could release all the energy. When he saw that the criminal had settled down, the guy exhaled. He made the right decision not to maim people so easily. The two servants still couldn't understand what had happened here. Did it really end so quickly? Who are these people? Grabbing the girl's hand, Sayu dragged her away from here so she wouldn't cause more trouble, and the criminal was left alone. Hearing the question of what his name was, Sayu stopped for a second without even turning around. After a second, the guy turned his head and briefly called his name with a twinkle in his blue eyes. The people had already started to slowly disperse. Two servants had finally found their mistress and wanted to take her away from this strange place. Meanwhile, Khan fought the urge to join the battle on the man, realized he couldn't face this man alone. The boy was about to leave, but two figures appeared in front of him. These two men were from the Gaiban. Two middle-aged men stood in front of his eyes. They called out their name and bowed to the master. Sayu, I'm starting to realize it seems these two were following the criminal, and their plan must have failed. But now this man is too pissed off. A bad idea to follow him around could hurt a lot of people. When Song heard these people talking, she was even more surprised. After all, this person was an extraordinary person who was also related to the Gaiban. The two novices bowed, and after apologizing to the master, tried to disappear into the crowd. Looking at some obscure man holding the hand of their mistress, the servants were confused as to where this was coming from in the morning. Realizing that the girl was a bit busy right now, Sayu released her hand and apologized for the inconvenience. The two servants started talking about how they were late for their appointment with the Merchants Union. When Sayu heard about it, he asked if they were going on the same road. Services stopped for a second and looked at the strange stranger. Before this, Song was given a task by the head of her clan. The man said it was good for herself. Yun stood with his back turned and said that this girl is the wisest in this union. She knows everything perfectly. Standing in front of him, Song looked with clear eyes at her elder in this world. She was unrivaled. Soon, they all arrived. At the branch of the Heavenly Merchant in Taiwan, it was a huge building, several kilometers square. As soon as Sayu saw what was in front of him, he was surprised. He couldn't believe that such large houses existed. At the entrance, they were greeted by a servant. The man asked, "What purpose did they come here?" Song introduced herself. Seeing Sayu's personal seal, he was very surprised to see that she must have a high position in society to have been invited personally. In her hands, the girl had a piece of jewelry. It was a crystal butterfly of blue color. She said to show it to the head. And then Sayu remembered that he also had one of those things this little girl gave him. Even their uniforms were almost identical in the guy's hands, and he was holding a similar butterfly. A long time ago, a girlfriend gave him this thing just because their eyes were the same color. He was pulled out of his musings by Song, who invited the master to come inside. The boy shook himself a little and walked a few steps forward. There they were already met by the manager. A small man bowed and closed his eyes, saying his title. The entire time Sayu had been here, he had marveled at the size of this building. It was truly colossal. Seeing the confusion of his new friend's Song, asked them, "Did the master first time here?" The guy twitched in surprise. Looking at him, Song said that if the master wanted to get used to the place, it would be a good idea to make some friends to give him a tour. Surprised Sayu followed after them. The guy didn't even mention why she was the one who realized everything so abruptly. Soon they were already sitting in the large hall. Song said she had come here to ask for help. The head of the Merchants Union immediately realized they came here because of Yom and the Demon Blade, didn't they? That was right. Song barely nodded her head, and Chong is the only person who can be trusted in this situation. The head replied that they have been watching this man for a long time, and it is not news that suspicion is already spreading. Unintentionally, listening to their conversation, Sayu only confirmed his suspicions this demon blade was related to the black merchants. After a few seconds, the head asked for something to give to the young mistress of the managers, nodded his head. In his hands, he immediately found himself with a small book under his nose. Usually, they don't provide information, but this is a different case. Seeing this book in front of her young mistress, cried out in surprise, "Yes, indeed, this is very useful." Looking intently at his guests, the head said, "For now, it is unknown what Kang is doing, but they are in the process of figuring things out." Beginning to leaf through the book, Song scrutinized each line. So this is what does a black trafficker do? Hearing that they had made a deal with Mo Young 2 decades ago surprised him, but he didn't know that at all. The head immediately noticed this movement. Look at this guy. He hadn't reacted all this time, but as soon as he heard about the clan, he immediately flinched. After a few moments of thought, Song thanked her for the information. But it's not free. Doesn't the clan have anything to ask for? The head rose from his seat as a merchant. He wanted to minimize the damage from the incident. They suspected that the deputy head of Taiwan might have some connection to the Five Dragons Alliance. Sayu had been listening to them the whole time and trying to get into the conversation, but they were strange even too much. Notice his new guest, the head wanted to pay attention to him, but Sayu said he was just a chaperone, so don't bother. Mistress said this man is only here because she has a request. Hearing about some kind of request, Sayu visibly tensed up, and it wasn't mentioned at all. Hearing that this person is related to the Gaiban, the head visibly tensed up. That's quite serious. When Sayu realized what he was talking about, his alliance with the Gaiban was not as tight as it might have seemed. Let them not expect much from him. The two servants instantly felt an incredible pressure. It was simply a colossal force. Even the head, along with his servant, felt this was who this person was only left to guess. And only now did the girl realize her mistake. What a humiliation. She thought this man was related to the Gaiban. The master had already risen from his seat and was thinking of leaving, when suddenly he was followed by shouts of a guy who wanted to stop. Song was famously frightened. She should have been wary of this man she had trusted so blindly, and almost let everyone down. Meanwhile, the head of the union sighed heavily. What kind of sissy is such an accented one? Sayu went outside, where a man was already waiting for him. He had been under surveillance all this time. As soon as Sayu came out, a strange-looking man came out and greeted. The man's name was, so he looked more like a hedgehog than a man, and his mouth had a minimum of teeth. And now, somewhere deep in the woods, Kan was walking down a path and thinking he cursed everyone around him. The two novices had been following him the whole time the men were hiding behind the nearest bushes. Suddenly, one of them's stomach rumbled. Someone had not had time to eat today and now risked disrupting the entire operation. A man jumped out of the bushes and ran off into the distance. He had a stomach ache. His companion grabbed his head. He was a fool, but someone was already approaching him. The novice thought his friend had returned and immediately turned around, but his face had changed to his recognizable one. In front of them stood Kang Man holding a long sword and was already preparing to attack it. Seemed like someone was looking for him here, right? The unfortunate had already begun to crawl back. To save himself in any way would hardly do him any good. From somewhere, two more appeared. One of them was wearing a tank, and the other was the archer. They stood and watched what was happening. Yong frowned and looked at the criminal from under his wide-brimmed hat without saying a word. We should have searched the entire area. We can't let those rats get away and not followed them from the start. The cloaked man hissed, his eyes glowing like two fires from under his hood. The criminals began to be sentenced, and somewhere behind the bushes, hid the same Lucky, who went away on business that saved his life. The whole company moved somewhere down into the gorge. Kang laughed constantly in a place like this. No wonder he didn't find these people right away. It was a branch of the Black Traders called Redwater Fortress, a huge temple high up in the mountains. The head sat on the balcony and watched his army training this. They are going to hand over to the Allies. If within a few days of training them well, these people will become the strongest weapons, the head was very satisfied with. Still, something was missing. The man grimaced and began to ponder something. People trained day in and day out. It was a grueling, agonizing workout in which they completely forgot about fatigue. Suddenly, two more entered the room. It was the blade along with the archer. They advanced forward. A smiling Khan said that before destroying the Union, he had a small request. Hearing about some scum on his tail, the head of the Black Merchants Union wondered what they were talking about. Leaning on the railing, the criminal said that these were men from the Gaben. Only one could be found. Hardly the other had gone far away. The archer also said he found no trace of him. It was as if he had fallen through the ground. No problem. Criminal sighed and threw his head back and looked at everyone else. Yam pondered. What other scum is it possible that these people have begun to suspect something? It's time to get the fort out of here. When the archer heard about it, he was surprised that this place had been developed for several decades. In a situation like this, it's important to make a considered decision. The head leaned over and thought. He'll make the preparations and everything will go as it should, no doubt about it. Smiling Khan said he wanted something found for him. The man's eyes lit up with rage. Sometime during the night, the servant who was sent to follow the criminal returned, but only 1 second had taken his life. Hearing this monstrous news, Old Man Hong was horrified. It was just monstrous. The criminal began to act decisively. The novice fell to the ground and wept. He begged for punishment for failing to fulfill the will of the elder. Sayu was watching all of this. The guy was thinking, in the end, it all happened. This man decided to attack. Squatting down, the old man told the novice not to blame himself. It is the fault of the criminals only. Having finally found out where the residence of the Black Traders of the Union was located, the Gaibin frowned. He was sure it was related to each other. Meanwhile, that hedgehog-looking man ran down the street and shouted that there was a message from the scouts that they had found out where the fortress was. Everyone was very glum. They felt that something was going to happen. The elder realized it too. The old man came out in front of everyone else and shouted that he too felt guilty, that the student was hurt. After this fiery speech, the old man asked the king, "What is the plan now?" Looking at him, the kid said that after what happened, he should personally send this man to hell. No matter how many people managed to gather, Sayu said that he himself should handle it in. The guy's voice felt confident. No doubt the old man understood, but one of their novices had been hurt and they had to strike back. There was a brief pause between them. Hong was certain that he must avenge such a heinous crime. After a short silence, raising an eyebrow, the sage asked, so they moved out. Smiling back, the king replied that they were going out right now. The guy was already fully prepared. Near a large fortress of red water, some strange man was walking around and shouting about something at the top of his voice. The guard looked at him with surprised eyes and frowned at what this beggar was even doing here. It was Old Man Hong. He was marveling and looking at the fortress, wagering some madman. Meeting the guard's eyes, the old man continued to invite them to the Gaibin. If they came, they would be welcomed with good soup. Hearing about this sect, the guards immediately tensed up. They had just dealt with one of these today. But the old man came closer and put the ball back. What kind of cruelty is this? Is this how you treat your guests? Not half a second later, the doors to the fortress flew open, and with it, the two guards. The elder stood on the doorstep and looked at the result of his actions, the two guards squirming in pain and unable to move. There was a crazy smile on the old man's face. This had better be over quickly, and then celebrate properly. It's time to gather at the same table behind the old man's back. A lot of warriors appeared. They broke into the fortresses and started to destroy everything. They were cult followers who came to avenge their brother, who had been so inhumanely destroyed. People started fighting in the heart of the sect, and a real storm broke out. Now, while everyone's distracted, we can get down to business. The old man laughed. The outcome was already obvious. Sayu stared in surprise at the skill of the sect. Followers astounding, actually like the old man himself. The Gaibin men were incredibly strong, and they took down the merchants one by one with powerful blows. As they strolled through the center of the square, people were flying around. The only pity is that the old man will not have a worthy opponent. The old man, along with his partner, strolled past the battle while here fighters scattered one by one. Suddenly, one of the trade union warriors pounced on the old man, swinging his blade. The master looked at him with a surprised look. No sooner had the man gotten close enough to strike than the old man put his foot out and stopped the warrior. He only laughed. None of these warriors were his equal. They were just trash that would remain trash. Hearing that boy Song Wu wanted to become a merchant, Sayu was surprised. What a surprise. The head of the black merchants at this time became furious. They dared to break right into his fortress in broad daylight. Archer reported that Kang had gone to Taiwan and taken everything he needed before dawn. The Great Merchant Alliance would cease to exist. But that didn't matter now. Yom was more worried that they might be destroyed now, and everyone would suffer heavy casualties. Putting the cup of alcohol back on the table, the gunman said that if everyone here went to the other side of the world, the agreement would be canceled. They've spent years building up their strength, and if they lose now, it will be a disgrace for life. The man said that from now on, the House of Bloody Tears is just a trade union problem, that's all. Once Sayu and the old man together approached the main building, the head immediately leaned out of the window. Why would this scum behave like this in someone else's territory? The man glared his eyes with anger. With a grimace on his face, he demanded they get out of here immediately if they wanted to live. The first to speak was Elder Gaben, who shouted that the traitors had destroyed his novice. Hearing the name of the head of the black merchants, Sayu was interested, so this is what he looks like. Now it's clear. Elder Yom wondered, would the Gaben attack without evidence? They never said anything back, after all. But evading the answer was useless. The old man said they had an irrefutable witness. Suddenly, after a short whistle, dozens more warriors appeared. Who are these even? The eyes of these men shone like lights at night, each wearing some rags like homeless dots. The men from the Gaben tried to resist them in any way. One of them had already swung his weapon. The unknown hooded fighter dodged with incredible ease. He flashed his eyes and stepped aside. When his hood came off, the haggard face of a man barely able to stand was revealed. Sayu, together with the old man, the sight of this person opened their eyes in surprise. This was not exactly something they couldn't expect. These are children. The head of the black merchants then laughed. If they wanted to pass on, then let them fight these children. The man spread his arms and ordered an attack. These people don't feel pain at all, so you don't have to worry. An archer emerged from somewhere. He warned the master not to use their goods as a defense, or there would be consequences. It was a cunning plan. The head turned and smiled. He can't go to the other world alone, so let the archer go and show what he can do. Suddenly, another white swordsman shooter appeared on the balcony and immediately ordered to deal with it. Instead of a face, this man had a mask, or a bare skull flashing his eyes. He obediently nodded his head. He moved forward like a ghost and grasped his blade, preparing to attack. A dozen more of the same white swordsmen, dressed in some kind of sheet, appeared in the air. Lifting his head up, Sayu counted 12 fighters in his seat. The swordsmen were approaching, swinging their blades. They had to destroy these two. This is what it would become. One of the white swordsmen struck his opponent, and in one fell swoop, split his body into 2 pieces. No one could be left alive. All this time, Sayu just stood there and watched without doing anything. The minds of these children were completely subjugated to the boy's staring face without any emotion. These people will never come to their senses. They're not people at all. They're just puppets. The guy's hands lit up with lightning. As soon as possible, need to put them out of their misery. Suddenly, Sayu felt a soft touch. The old man asked him not to do this, or else the consequences would be irreversible. The elder frowned and said that these people would not raise an eyebrow if it was necessary to destroy any of these people. But it's all right, they'll manage. The old man and the boy stood still, waiting for further action. One of the swordsmen shattered the battle stick with a deft blade strike and destroyed one of the fighters. Sayu Nayu was so furious that he could no longer control himself, how he could turn a blind eye to other people's pain and suffering. Oh no, the old man seemed to see where this was going. The guy had an explosive temper. You shouldn't have pissed him off like that. On the other hand, that's what humans should do. White swordsmen continued to take down fighters, one by one. The old drunk realized he was wrong. He'd been running away for years without seeing the point. And this guy made it all right. Swinging a huge whip, the old man prepared to destroy his enemies. His eyes lit up like in the old days. One of the white swordsmen saw the whip caught on his arm, but there was nothing the monster could do. With only one swing of his hand, the old man knocked the blade out of the fighter's hands and pierced him through. The rest of the swordsmen prepared. This old man turns out to be not as easy as it seems. The fighters retreated back a few steps. The elder shouted to his underlings to stay back if they wanted to go to the other world. The drunkard laughed. So how do they look at the Gaben now? Aren't they just a bunch of beggars? So what are they afraid of? The rest of the people rushed forward must fight to the last to destroy all the white swordsmen. The small army had surrounded the enemy and was moving straight at the fighters. Ahead of them ran an old man. He swung his whip from a good-natured drunkard to a real monster. Now the men from the Gaben sector were moving in a completely different way. They were destroying one swordsman after another. A large and heavy stick crashed straight into the mask of one of the warriors, leaving several deep cracks. The warriors in white swung around and jumped on their opponents. They're just scum. How can they fight like that? But suddenly, from the back of one of the novices, another one jumped out and already swung his huge stick. People began to stand one on top of the other, forming a living fortress. They put forward long sticks. With just a glimpse of this, Sayu was surprised at how quickly this old man had revived. He is, after all, a different, really amazing person. The head of the black merchants gritted his teeth. He could not believe that this was happening. How is it possible that these scum allow themselves? All that was left was to deal with him. Sayu looked up and saw an old man standing on the balcony. It seems they had something to discuss. The boy's eyes glowed with blue light again in a body of unprecedented power. The archer continued to sprinkle the others with arrows. He stood somewhere elevated and shot at everyone he saw. Taking a few big leaps, Sayu pushed himself off the roof and ran straight to where his main target stood. The head of the black merchants continued to rage, shouting to his fighters to destroy everyone in their path. If he'd only known this was going to happen, he would have immediately run away without the man even realizing who was coming to him. In a second, Sayu appeared on the balcony. The old man recoiled back and fell to the floor in surprise. Ghost Archer appeared on the other side, and his voice was heard. These people would have met one day anyway, but not under these circumstances. Without speaking for long, the man drew an arrow and launched it straight at his opponent. This time, the kid couldn't dodge. The arrow hit him right in the chest, and the poor guy flew right off the balcony. Happiness. He landed on his feet in Sayu's hands, holding the arrow, struggling to keep himself alive. In a flash, the archer swung over the fence and ran after his enemy, but he couldn't leave him alive. Yom rejoiced. He laughed like a madman, and indeed this archer is the best of the best, as one would expect. The fighter's eyes lit up perfectly, and he hit his target with precision. All that was left was to finish Sayu off. But much to the man's surprise, he noticed that the kid was holding an arrow in his hands. How did he catch it in the first place? A smile appeared on the boy's face. It was the opponent's first and last chance he missed. An incredible energy began to ooze from Sayu's back. Now the guy let it out at full power. It was a terrifying sight. The archer was still trying to do something. He was pulling his arrows to hit the enemy, but it was useless. Sayu Li moved only slightly and moved out of the line of attack. The arrow stuck straight into the ground. The enemy jumped up, and drawing his bow, prepared to shoot again. He loaded several arrows at once. It was still too slow for Sayu. The guy looked at him blankly. Arrows flew out, one after another. The archer tried to hit the annoying guy, but it didn't work. The strength of this archer exceeds any other man, was incredibly fast and accurate. He is the same as the demon blade. Meanwhile, Yomyu in his office and trembling with fear what he was so afraid had happened. Did the man stay here forever? Grabbing onto one of the poles, Sayu flew over it. He didn't mind such tricks, but there was something more fun to be had. The archer had already drawn his arrow to shoot, but it was too late. The enemy was closing in on him. The man flew into the air and literally flew into the room with his back to the front. Sayu followed him at breakneck speed. The guy was cutting through space and coming closer and closer. Clenching his fist, the archer already prepared to deliver his final blow, he vowed to catch this guy by all means. Unsurprisingly, the archer shortens the distance. Sayu stood on the windowsill and watched his opponent from top to bottom. From the beginning, it was a plan to lure the guy here. Sayu watched with his enlightened eyes. Holding his ghostly thread, the archer smiled. His plan had been figured out, but it was more fun this way. The boy even got a little pissed off. What does fun mean is that it's like a game. Suddenly the thread cracked, only to turn to dust. In a second, the archer didn't expect anything like this. Sayu changed. He became like a demon. Fury overwhelmed his body. He stared with burning eyes in front of him. He continued to chase his opponent. The archer tried to run away, but it was all to no avail. Grasping the beam, Sayu moved even closer. His eyes rolled like two torches. All around, this entire temple began to collapse. The archer watched the debris fall on him from above. Fortunately, after all this, he managed to survive. The man jumped out of the wreckage and landed on Earth. The two silhouettes stood in the light of the moon. The archer, at this point, decided to introduce himself and gave his name. Looking somewhere away from himself, Seiyu also called out his name, but the guy was still angry. The archer swung his weapon and launched a dozen arrows at once, eliminating the possibility of dodging. The man was like a devil. He shot again and again, releasing dozens of arrows. Soon they formed a true vortex. Seiyu, despite all the danger, stood his ground and didn't even move aside to leave. He had already said he wouldn't run away. The boy moved closer up, his entire body covered in energy lightning. There were only a couple seconds left to go. The archer was also not going to give up so easily. His eyes were burning. The man gritted his teeth from overexertion. But not a single arrow never reached. Seiyu looked with a sad look at his opponent. It was all useless. And only now the archer realized that he had lost. Was it really all over? The man looked at himself with horror and fear in his eyes. Before he even realized how he had gone to the other side, Seiyu was moving away from him with quick leaps. At last, the guy turned around. His game was over too quickly. Is all this pain and suffering a game too? The white swordsman stopped in place and couldn't believe this man had destroyed the great archer. Who was he after all? Everything around froze for a few seconds. Elder Hong stared at his comrade in horror. This was a true god of battle. He just couldn't believe what was happening. The old man raised his head and looked at the boy, standing somewhere high up on the roof of the building. And where are you? Far away in the woods. At this point, Yom was trying to hide his creation, destroyed in minutes. Who is this man, actually?